He's up. Let's get ready to RPG!
RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG!
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Knights of Last Call. My name is Derek Melinda, and I'm back with another live stream where we're going to talk about tabletop role-playing games. Go figure. So this week we covered Grimwild earlier. On Tuesday we did a big long stream, much longer than I anticipated, but we had a lot of support come out, which was great. And in fact, the game's creator Max stopped by at the end, left a nice big tip. So thanks a lot for the support of the show, or for the support of the game. And officially it is out. So if you're interested in something new, exciting, maybe a modern take on your classic fantasy RPG experience, maybe you should go check out Grimwild. On the other hand, if you want to take a look at a 21, 22-year-old game that is a variant of 3.0 D&D, well, then you've come to the right stream. So today we're going to be doing, I guess it's not I called it Back to the RPGs, because we're going back in time. I should have called it RPG Last Look, right? So today we're going to be talking about a very, relatively unknown game, I think. I haven't really seen it discussed much outside of very niche circles that came out in right before or right around the time that 3.5 edition came out. And we can talk about 3rd edition in general as well. And this is what we're going to be covering today is a book called Arcana Unearthed. And it says right here on the back, there's a quote from Gary Gygax. It says, "No question about it, Monte Cook's Arcana Unearthed is a knockout." I wonder how much they had to pay him to say that. So we'll get into this. We'll talk about this. I have the PDF. It's on sale. Go figure. It's one of those old PDFs. It's only like $8 or something. But we'll talk about it, and I'll share some stories of my experiences with it. And we'll talk a little bit about Monte Cook and 3rd edition and Malhovic Press and all that other stuff. So hopefully you enjoy this kind of look backwards at some old gaming tech and some old stuff. Still getting over. I mean, I'm not sick anymore, but I'm definitely still coughing from this cold I had. So in any case, welcome everyone. So couple of notes, couple of liner notes. So Monte Cook was a game designer who worked for TSR in the 90s. His name was stapled to a number of products. And in the late 90s, when Wizards of the Coast bought TSR, they kept on a number of designers and basically sort of told them that if they wanted to keep their jobs, they had to move to the Pacific Northwest. They had to move up near Seattle there. And they started working on a new edition of Dungeons and Dragons. And Monte Cook was tapped for this team. And a lot of people know or mention John Tweet's name as being associated with with 3rd edition. Sometimes Rich Baker. But Monte Cook was, arguably one of the most, impactful people, love it or hate it, on 3rd edition. And Monte Cook was the author, the preliminary author of the 3rd edition Dungeon Master's Guide 3.0. Now, cut to a couple of years later, and Wizards of the Coast is sort of getting into the process of potentially selling to Hasbro. Hey, Satir
tipped $5. Shout out to London.
Nice shout out for London. So Satir, thank you so much for that. We are definitely going to miss London. London, one of the mods on our Knights of Last Call Discord, and a huge game master for our play by post crowd, and just a very frequent conversation starter and conversation participant. But London, unfortunately, has some personal life stuff that he has to take care of. And you know what? Sometimes Knights of Last Call Discord can be very it could be a time suck. So he's making a grown up decision, and he's stepping away for a while or for maybe forever. But of course he'll always be welcome back. So very, very sad to see him go, but very happy for the impact that he left on our server, and I wish him all the best. Thank you, Satir. So when Wizard of the Coast was going to buy or be sold to Hasbro, as part of that process, now, my understanding is that Wizard of the Coast had always planned to create a 0.5 edition. They had kind of started talking about it as soon as they released 3rd edition. So some of these things were already in the works. But when Hasbro bought Wizards of the Coast, you don't buy a new company, you don't buy Dungeons and Dragons and not just immediately say, all right, I just bought you, I want to make some money. So my understanding of the story is that Hasbro basically accelerated the production of 3.5 because they wanted a new line of books that they could get on their revenue, on their balance sheets, right? It was 2000, it was 2002, 2003. So nothing's really that different than Hasbro of today, right? They're thinking about quarterly earnings and top line revenue numbers. So they sort of hyper accelerated that. Well, during that process, Monte Cook was let go from Wizard of the Coast. So he went ahead and he started his own gaming company. And his basis was, people were starting to figure it out. There's no doubt about that. But, he kind of realized, hey, this OGL that they released is very expansive. And I think you can just kind of copy the rules of Dungeons and Dragons. And while you can't use this is back then, you can't use beholders or you can't use any of that stuff. The basic rules of the D20 3.0 system are basically free to use as long as you include this open gaming license in your book, even if you end up basically just copying a lot of those rules. Now, a lot of people kind of think about Pathfinder 1st edition as being the sort of hallmark watershed moment of that. But the truth is, there may have been a couple other books that kind of did a little bit of stuff before this, but really it was Monte Cook's Arcana Unearthed because, he was part of the damn system that created this thing. Monte Cook's Arcana Unearthed was the sort of the first time that someone basically realized that you could use the OGL and kind of carbon copy the rules of D&D and create your own version of D&D. And there's a lot of I don't know Monte Cook personally. I've met him a couple of times at cons, but I wonder if there wasn't like a twinge of get fucked, because what's interesting here is the idea how the OGL was sold to the powers that be at Wizards of the Coast was this idea that they knew from TSR that producing all the minor stuff was a loser. Producing stuff for a game master was a loser. Producing adventures was a loser. And when I say a loser, I just mean not great for your bottom line, right? The things that sold were the big, premium books with a premium price on them. And at that time, now with 5th edition, we're used to, the adventures of 5th edition being basically the same thing as, as a normal book, right? Big hardcover, Curse of Strahd and stuff like that. But back then, adventures were like these little 30-page, 35-page books. Even the splat books from 3.0 were soft cover. They were, I think, probably less than 100 pages. They were maybe 80 pages. And they had a very low price. I think they were pretty cheap. So there was this idea that, the Wizards of the Coast basically wanted to avoid producing this, nonsense. But the problem was they also knew that you needed this stuff that was getting produced for settings and for adventures and targeted at dungeon masters and some of this stuff. You needed that stuff to make the whole ecosystem work. Right? Because, somebody needed to make adventures, right? Somebody needed to make stuff for the Dungeon Masters. They just didn't want it to be Wizards of the Coast. So the pitch to Wizards of the Coast that, Ryan Dancy kind of worked, and the idea of it was that, hey, if we make a open gaming license, we can let all these small micro publishers, people who can get by on very, small margins, and they're not looking to support a whole corporate infrastructure. They might just be a small press publisher. And they can come out and they can make the adventures and they can make the small settings books, or, they can handle this sort of niche stuff. Because again, with TSR, TSR had just kind of shot themselves in the foot by producing, 20 different campaign game lines. Here's a Dark Sun line. Here's a Forgotten Realms line. Here's a Greyhawk line. Here's a Ravenloft line. Here's a Planescape line. And you just couldn't support that at that system. So they said, let the other people, let the smaller people handle that. Okay. Kingdoms of Kalamar, which is produced by the people who make Knights of the Dinner Table, and of course Hackmaster, was a great example of an early adopter of this. They came out, they used a third-party license, they created Kingdoms of Kalamar. They really took advantage of that and created this whole ecosystem around this world of Kalamar, which is something that Wizards of the Coast didn't have to do. And so that was how it was sold. And arguably it worked very well. A lot of publishing companies popped up. Granted, some of that was crap. I say this as someone who's bought more than my fair share of Mongoose publishing books. And if you know back in the day, you know that Mongoose publishing books created some stinkers. Even Alderac, AEG, Alderac Entertainment Group created some stinkers as well. So, some of the stuff was crap. Some of the stuff was what we would call probably shovelware, right? And, it was kind of garbage. But there was a ton of stuff, and that was awesome. But the idea was that all these people making all this stuff, the company, Wizards of the Coast, was under this idea or this impression that they would still have to go out and buy the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. And sure, you might go buy a bunch of campaign settings from one small press company and adventures from other small press companies, maybe even the occasional bestiary. But of course, if you wanted a Beholder, if you wanted a Carrion Crawler, if you wanted a Mind Flayer, you're going to have to go back to your old reliable monster manual. But the Player's Handbook, which I'm sure, I don't know what percentage it is, but I'm sure it accounts for like 50 or 60% of like the total sales of an entire game system, would have to be bought so that people could play this. So sure, everyone's buying from all these companies, but these are crap products that they didn't want to make anyways. But all those people are gonna have to go buy a Player's Handbook, a big, thick, heavy, expensive, book. However, and if you read the OGL, which is written in here, the idea of the OGL, if you've ever read it, and some people have now because of the drama that happened toward it basically says that, like the games are required to basically say, like, you need to own a Player's Handbook. The truth is, though, you don't, because rules aren't copyrightable, and the open gaming license was very open. And so what people ended up doing, and I contend that Monte Cook was one of the first, is they released Arcana Unearthed in 2003. Now, remember, he was let go from Wizards of the Coast. He had just moved across the country a few years earlier. And in fact, his wife had also worked at Wizards of the Coast. I think she stayed working on with them for a little while longer. This is his first wife, Sue. And I think, but ultimately she ended up leaving and became a member of Malhavik. So he created his own gaming company, Malhavik Press, and he released this under the Sword and Sorcery imprint line, which was actually a publishing house that was built up under White Wolf Publishing. So Sword and Sorcery was actually one of the first people to really produce third-party content for 3rd edition D&D. So what he created was Arcana Unearthed, a variant Player's Handbook. So what does this mean? Well, if you read here on the back, it basically says, you're still supposed to buy a Player's Handbook, and you're still supposed to buy a Dungeon Master's Guide. But the truth is, you don't have to. And what these variant player handbooks are doing, EverQuest did this, Arcana Unearthed did this, a bunch of games ended up doing this, is they basically created a comprehensive game that basically let you publish your own game system where you didn't have to buy the Player's Handbook. And of course, the ultimate expression of this was Pathfinder 1st Edition. I mean, Pathfinder 1st Edition, sure, it's got its own little unique cleanups and tweaks, and it does, and this game does too. But it is basically 3.5 edition D&D. But you do not own, anyone who's played Pathfinder 1 knows you never had to open up a D&D book in order to do that. And it was this. Now, Pathfinder created that because when Wizards of the Coast, now Hasbro, was going to make a 4th edition of D&D, they said, fuck that, never again. Okay, and so 4th edition, right here, got released not under the OGL. It got released under the GSL, the Game Systems License, an entirely separate license that, quite frankly, almost had no third-party publishing support for it because it was very restrictive. Because Wizards of the Coast said, we're not letting that happen to us again, where people are literally going to copy-paste our rules, make a couple of changes, call it a brand new game, and sell it to people as a premium hardcover book, bypassing our game. Because that is what people had done. And so the 4th edition, right, was created. The GSL was created before Paizo released Pathfinder 1. So you have to remember that Wizards of the Coast was already salty about people doing this before they, even released Pathfinder 1. Now, Pathfinder 1 was obviously the biggest example of this because so many people disliked 4th edition or were dissuade, even though they never played it and they don't know anything about the game, but they bought into the media hype and the hate train and the haters, and they decided they hated it. And it wasn't D&D, and so they ended up going to play Pathfinder 1, which was basically 3.5, 3.78 edition, right? So while this game may not mean much to you, in some ways, I think it's part of that really interesting time during the 2000s when these games were sort of entering this kind of new weird corporate open gaming era. So, and of course, it was created by one of the game's designers. Now, of course, remember that Monte Cook, I should say, was a lead designer for 3rd edition, and they had known that they were going to do a 3.5. So in some ways, this was taking his ideas, and then he got fired, and they kind of went in whatever direction they were going to go. And he said, I want to do how I would have done maybe a new version of D&D, or how would I change things without changing things too much, because it's, again, still based off of the 3rd edition OGL D20 basis. And that's how we ended up with Monte Cook's Arcana Unearthed, a variant player's handbook. And of course, as is the case with so many of my gaming books, this one is signed by Mr. Monte Cook himself. So now you can buy this book. Now he did release, I hesitate to call it a 2nd edition. In fact, I would call it a remastered. He did create a remastered version of this called Arcana Evolved, which has a red cover. And it's a thicker book. It has some extra content, some extra advice, a couple extra, maybe an extra class or two. I never bought it because we had kind of finished playing Arcana Unearthed by then. And but you can buy that one too. So, but it's more of a remaster. It's not really a 2nd edition. It's a remaster. In fact, it's evolved, right? It's kind of the same kind of weird bullshit term as remaster. And of course, it's a play on words, right? Because Unearthed Arcana was the original it was kind of the original splat book from 1st edition D&D. Nowadays, people think of it as a article that gets released, but originally it was a rule book. It was produced by Gary Gygax as a set of optional rules, for the 1st edition AD&D game. And this was, in kind of ways, some ways, this is kind of like the first splat book. You could argue Supplement 1 Greyhawk was maybe the first splat book, but in some ways, this was kind of the first splat book. And actually, this contained the Barbarian class, which was not in the original version of the game, but it got released in Unearthed Arcana. So he swapped it around. Instead of Unearthed Arcana, you got Arcana Unearthed. So very, very tongue-in-cheek, clever, as well as there. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get into Arcana Unearthed. And before we do that, though, I do want to say hi to everybody. Kendall, hello. Jackal, what's up? Kendall, good to see you. Lance, happy to have you here, buddy. Paladin Actual, nice. Welcome. Sorrel. Nope, it's not a Euro-friendly stream. Although I was thinking highs as eyes just today about I should do another 1 p.m., 2 p.m. stream for my Euro friends here soon. I'd like to do at least one of those a month, just so, I get it, people can watch the VODs, but that way, it's easier for Euro people to be in chat and be part of the thing. Cannabrook is excited that they can see my 4th edition books behind me. I am a fan of 4th edition D&D. What's up, Shadram? You remember playing the book? Okay, awesome. And Cannabrook had Arcana Evolved. I got my softcover 3.0 splats. I got mine too. Let me see. Let's do it. Sword and Fist, a guidebook for fighters and monks. Defenders of the Faith, a guidebook for paladins and clerics. Tome and Blood, a guidebook for wizards and sorcerers. Song and Silence, a guidebook for rogues and bards. And Masters of the Wild, a guidebook for barbarians, rangers, and druids. Those were the OG 5 3.0 splat books. Hola, Elder Goblin Games. Welcome, welcome, welcome. 4E is the best E. From a holistic, if you're just looking at Dungeons and Dragons and you're just looking at holistically in terms of mechanics, interaction, presentation, layout, completedness, interconnectiveness, mechanical sensitivity, then yes, it is the best edition of D&D. Now, some people say it's soulless and it's flavorless, and that's a matter of taste. But in terms of being designed, right, I think it is the best designed game of D&D. Kind of Brooke says PF2E does 4E better than 4E in my opinion. Yes and no. I think it. I'll say yes or no. I think it does some things better, and I think it does some things worse. High Desires. It's kind of had a mini renaissance. I think what's really held back 4th edition. It's just the fact that it's not part of the OGL, and there's just no way to really actively support it anymore. So, I think that's what keeps it. I think you're right. I think there is an undercurrent of people who are discovering the game, and now that it's kind of old is new, right? And it's cool to look like something that everybody else hated, right? But yeah, Kennebrooke, that could very well be the case. I really hated the prequels for a very long time, and then the sequels came out, and now. I still don't really love 1 and 2, but I like them a little bit better. I always thought 3 was good. So, that opening space fight scene when they're going to rescue Chancellor Palpatine in 3 is awesome. The lightsaber duel is awesome. Anyways, point is, Revenge of the Sith, I think, is a really good film. And graphically, too, it's really cool looking. Well, Ludwite, the problem is, the funny thing is that, like, I remember when Pathfinder was getting released. And, of course, remember, Pathfinder was only released because Paizo had been a magazine publisher, and they had been an adventure publisher through their dungeon magazine, right? The first 3 adventure paths, Shackled City, Age of Worms, and Savage Tides, were published in Dungeon Magazine, which was owned by Wizards of the Coast, but published and produced and managed by this Paizo Publishing. They only created Pathfinder 1 because with the change of the official D&D game, Wizards of the Coast took back the license. They weren't going to be able to produce Dungeon or Dragon magazine anymore, and they're a publishing company. So they've got a bunch of writers on staff. So what are they going to do? And they couldn't do anything for 4th edition D&D because the GSL sucked. So the only choice they had was to steal the rules from 3rd edition, make their own game, and then boom, that was it. My voice seems low. I'm really low. I don't know. I'll give myself a little bit more juice. There we go. Well, this isn't a first look, Voinupula, because I played a bunch of many sessions of Arcana Unearthed. Does anyone remember Magic of Incarnum from 30E? I love that weird book. Absolutely. I think it was just called the Incarnate was the class. Yeah, where you made like intangible pseudo magic items, and they were like spells, but they worked like magic items. And you equipped them to yourself. It was a very cool book, and it came out at the end of 3.5. There was so many stuff that came out at the end of 3.5 that was, there was a totem. Maybe there was a couple different classes, You're right. But anyways, yeah, there was a bunch of there was a bunch of books that came out near the end of 3rd edition, 3.5 as sort of this precursor to 4th edition that were, awesome. Book of Nine Swords, Dungeon Craft, Magic of Incarnum, Player's Handbook 2, Dragon Magic, Monster Manual 5. There's usually another one that I can think of that I think of being as part of that list. It was, yeah. Anyways. Hides his eyes. Thank you for the super chat. By the way, I just ran my 2nd season of Fabula Ultima, which I heard about on this channel. It's a one-on-one campaign with my girlfriend. Fantastic. Having an awesome time so far. That's awesome. How long is your season, Hides his eyes? I'm curious. Because obviously the game goes to 50, And I know that a lot of people, you start at 5. So I know a lot of people play in such a way that they're gaining about a level a session, but that's still 45 sessions. So, session. Okay, you're right. You ran your second session. Okay, you said second season, and I thought, oh, you're doing a seasons. Okay, you did a session. Okay, second session. That's cool. This is a thirst look. Yeah, well, we were, if you, as many things do go on the Knights of Last Call, a couple of us, Ben and GM Scott and I, were talking about this game in the 3E channel or something the other day, and I remember just being like, it was a cool book, and I think this book is really interesting because I have a reputation for being like, Derek hates everything that isn't elves, dwarves, and humans, and Derek only likes D&D, and Derek only likes stuff from Tolkien. And the thing about Monte Cook's Arcana Unearthed is it has no elves and it has no dwarves, so we're gonna get into that. I hope you noticed in today's, I did not see today's WotC's. I hope you noticed in today's WotC's Dragon stream, most of changes are bringing back 4th edition Dragon mechanics. I did not know that, but it does not surprise me. Shatterheart. What I've seen time and time again is with Pathfinder 2, with D&D 5e, is they just steal stuff from 4th edition and put in and hope nobody notices because, again, it was designed really, really well. And yeah, I think you would really like 4E in theory. It sound game design principles. I wonder if I would enjoy in practice. And the answer is, I don't know. Some people really do bounce off of it. Cannon Brooks, Star Wars Saga Edition was also really, really great. Saga definitely felt like 3.75, and that was a big influence to us as well. All right. Arcana Unearthed. All right. Okay. All right. So Monte Cook's Arcana Unearthed. So here we have. Now, of course, remember this is a variant player's handbook. So as we look into the and you can even see here, special thanks to Jonathan Tweet and Skip Williams, the other 2 co-designers of 3rd edition D&D. So if we look at the table of contents, we can see that, we have, it looks a lot like a D&D book. It has the, basic introduction of, what the game is. Then, right, as D&D is as D&D does, it does not talk about the rules of the game. Instead, it just goes straight into stats, mechanics, how you would build a character sheet. Of course, 20 years later, I don't like this approach. I like teaching people the rules first. But, we've got 6 ability scores. They're the exact same. And then we get into the races. And you can see here that we do have some different races. We see human. Okay. But then we see Feyeen, Giants, Litorians, Moja, Rune Children, Sibeccai, and Verrik. So aside from humans, these are all brand new races. And I can actually tell you that when we ran an Arcana Unearthed campaign, I think we may have only had 1 human. I know we had a giant. I know we had at least 1 or 2 Litorans. I don't think we had a Moja just because no one played it. We had a Rune Child. We had a Sibeccai. We had a Verrik. All right. And then, of course, because this is 3rd edition based and, we care so much about the simulationism, we've got to have our age charts and our height and weight charts. All right. So we got some new races, and we are going to take a look at those. Then we have all new classes. We have the Akashic. We have the Champion, the Green Bond, the Mage Blade, the Magister, the Oathsworn, the Rune Thane, the Totem Warrior, the Unfettered, the War Mane, and the Witch. So this game had its own complete unique list of classes, and in some cases, they kind of replaced the 3rd edition classes 1 for 1. The War Mane was basically your fighter, and then like the Magister was basically your wizard, and the Green Bond was kind of your druid, but they were different, and you will see, we'll look into those differences. So we'll take a look at the classes as well. And of course, obviously being a, so we've got 12 to page 9, to page 70. So 60 pages are dedicated to races and classes and all this other stuff. Now, of course, these classes are 3rd edition classes. They're not 4th edition classes. They're not Pathfinder 2 classes where you need, pages and pages and pages of feats and pages and pages and pages of powers. So, the classes only take, 4 or 5 pages to basically discuss what you get from the class. Then we have skills, which is basically the same rules as 3rd edition. We don't have to worry too much about there. Although, some of these changes at the time were like, oh, that's such a revolutionary thing. We've got some feats. And of course, remember, because this is technically a variant player's handbook, any of the feats from the core player's handbook are technically still legal. Some new equipment. And then, of course, people always say, D&D is not a war game. All right, ready? Playing the game. So finally, right, we've made our character. We've gone through 140 pages. We've picked a race. We've picked a class. We have no idea what the game is, but we picked a race and a class. We've picked our skills. We've learned what these skills do. We picked a feat. We've learned what a feat does. All right, we've bought equipment. Not sure what it is. Okay, good. Playing the game. Teach me how the game works. All right, movement, vision, encounters, the combat round, armor class, hit points, facing and flanking, making attacks of opportunity, inflicting damage, death, dying, and healing, right? So it's always one of those funny things where you're like, oh, okay. So the game is basically combat. More combat. Oh, so here's something new. Hero points. So we'll get into those. And then magic. And I think magic is actually one of the things about this game that I liked what it did the most, and we will talk about magic. Although fundamentally still not that different, really, than a standard D20 Vancian kind of system. It did have some interesting components to it that we will discuss. And then, of course, a laundry list of spells, and then the character sheet, and then the open game license. Is there skills? There sure is, Derek, right here. So as we are wont to do, where's the non-fighty stuff? Yeah, not in there. Because, obviously, if it's not in the player's handbook, then that means you're not allowed to do it. And by the way, this is one of the problems that I see people talk about all the time with 4th edition D&D. 4th edition D&D basically said, it was kind of like the Brennan Lee Mulligan idea. 4th edition was like, look, you got skills, your GM might call for them, they might not call for them. You don't really need rules for how to use skills, maybe some advice on how to make up DCs, and that's it. And so the actual amount of rules that 4th edition spends on telling you how to, craft a boat or, talk to the innkeeper is very minimal. And so what does it have a lot of rules on? The stuff that people tend to need or want rules for, which is fighting. And so that's why people look at the game and they go, oh, it's just, it's just combat. Kendall, I can't believe they stole hero points from Pathfinder 2nd edition, right? 20 years earlier. And you know what? Hides his eyes. Look, I don't want to turn this into a 4th edition thing. I actually was yelling on RFC stream like about a month ago. And this is actually where I made Steven realize that like Pathfinder 2 was just the evolution of 4th edition. And he's like, holy shit, I think I just like 4th edition. I was like, yeah. But I was like, people always say 4th edition. And people even in chat were saying, you can't role play, which I fucking hate. Because even if role play means to you talking in character and saying stuff, okay, then it doesn't matter what the game is, right? You can do whatever you want. But the other thing I said was 4th edition is the edition of the game of Dungeons and Dragons that has the most support for non-combat encounters, because it has an entire section of stuff related to skill challenges, which no other game system has. So it is the only version of D&D that actually goes out of its way to actively and directly support non-combat encounters. So there's that. Yeah, there you go. Pathfinder is 4th edition. There you go. He said it here first. All right, so let's take a look at the character sheet. So the character sheet is pretty basic, right? We can see that here. There we go. We've got 6 ability scores. Voy, good night. Sorry to hopefully you enjoy the VOD. Right. Well, technically, there's nothing in the rules that say you're allowed to speak unless you're using the verbal component of a spell, right? Exactly. And if the rule doesn't say that you can speak, then clearly you can't speak. So if Pathfinder 1 is D&D 3.75 and Pathfinder 2 equals D&D 4.5, so is Pathfinder 3 D&D 5.25? Would that make Pathfinder 3 then D&D 2024? So we've got 6 ability scores, nothing new here. You have a score, you have a modifier, the same modifiers you're used to. We've got our 3 saving throws as normal. You have an initiative modifier as normal. Armor class is calculated the same way. Ooh, boys and girls, don't you miss it sometimes? Your armor bonus, your shield bonus, your dex bonus, your size bonus, your miscellaneous modifiers. We've got your weapon stuff here as well. And of course, remember this is a game that had touch AC and flat-footed AC and all the like. Your melee attack, your weapon, your personal information. How much XP do you have? How much money do you have? All your weight, right? Basic stuff. Here are all your skills. Same stuff. Ranks plus a modifier plus miscellaneous bonuses equals your total modifier. Roll a d20, add that. And then stuff for your equipment. So that's it. That's the character sheet. So it's and here's where all your races and here's where all your racial abilities, class abilities, and feats go. So that's it. It's an extremely basic character sheet, right? So this is like 3rd edition, stripped down, ready to go. All right. So, I opened up the council. Let's take a look at the world of possibilities. So what is this book? This is a handbook for people who want to play a fantasy role-playing game. It contains all the information that you will need to create a character, fight foes, cast spells, and play out an adventure. Although this book is a standalone work, you can use it alongside other players' handbooks. Not saying which ones, but you could. Mixing and matches the races, classes, and feats if you wish. This will expand your role-playing. This will expand your available role-playing options dramatically. See, role-playing is just making a character. It should be noted that this book is intended for those who have already played role-playing games in the past. Beginners looking for a simplistic tutorial-style game book should look elsewhere. This is an advanced book. And right away, we can see one of the main sticking points about Monte Cook, which I enjoy and other people don't, which is that Monte Cook has been sort of he's mostly associated with this idea of ivory tower design. Monte Cook has this idea that it's okay for role-playing games should be seen like a games. And it's okay if people are good at games and can be better at games and can be better than other people at games and can look at a game and make better choices than perhaps other people will make. Monte Cook would tell you that you don't need to have every feat and every option be balanced against one another, because part of the fun of playing a game is discovering winning strategies and discovering losing strategies. So, and then avoiding those losing strategies so that as the game progresses, you as a player get better at the game. This is a very, especially nowadays, this is a very controversial way to think about role-playing games, because we think about role-playing games so much now in this sort of collaborative mindset, this sort of there are no winners and there are no losers. But the truth of the matter is most people grew up playing D&D, including Monte Cook, with sort of role-playing games as a competition, not as a collaboration. And strangely enough, modern day D&D is still mostly designed to be a competitive-based game because it doesn't have any of the support to make it a collaborative-based game. And yet people try to play it as a collaborative-based game. So, you know, it is a controversial, idea that some people share and some people don't share. As a DM, I despise munchkins. Well, that's a loaded term, right? And I certainly can understand your dislike for people who are trying to make a strong character. But I think you'd be foolish to not think that that's a big reason why a lot of people play these games. And I also think there's something to be said about presenting a game that what I'm getting at is, if I give you a game, it could be a board game, it could be a card game, it could be a role-playing game, and I tell you, you could pick whatever you want. Hell, you could pick your stuff randomly, and your character will be just as valid and will be able to accomplish all the same challenges that anybody else would. I don't think it's difficult to kind of think about it, but in a sense, that I think lowers certain amounts of engagement. Because nowadays, the purpose of a role-playing game is not to challenge people. The purpose of a role-playing game is to give you enough shiny buttons and levers to distract you so that you keep playing through the adventures while feeling like you have official mechanically supported concepts to support your concept of your character. But I think when another way to quote in Incredibles, right? When everybody's special, no one is. So, in these classic games, I think you get into a problem where when every option is valid, then no options mean anything, right? You've reduced people's choices. in that respect. I don't know. I don't know how we can play without it. What is an RPG? My job is to teach people to not be munchkins by tricking them into thinking I'm teaching them to be munchkins. That's the spirit. Now, again, I think that there is a behavior at work here that can be not just, I don't want to say taken advantage of, right? And I've talked about this before, but, you know, like with Torchbearer, which I'm going to be playing here so soon running 2 campaigns of it. The way that you are a munchkin, what does munchkin mean? It means you're trying to do well at the game. So the problem isn't that's a good thing. That sounds like it should be a good thing, right? My player really cares, and I want to get invested, and I want to, you know, do well at the game. Well, the problem is, if your game is just fighting in combat, then, you know, you're asking players to handicap themselves rather than make a character that can function in that situation. So if the problem of somebody going and making some busted character build is that it makes all my fights pointless. Well, yeah, because you created a game system that rewards that kind of behavior. So I think that there are mechanics in play in games where you can reward behavior that encourages people to, you know, make character development a part of their character. And if someone was being a munchkin character developer, I don't think you'd complain as much. Now, I will agree that there is this issue of breaking the game, right? A power or an ability that is either being very read too much into it, and you're making some crazy extrapolation, and you're taking 2 or 3 different abilities that were never balanced and never designed against each other, right? So 1 + 1 + 1 equals 20. You know, I think that can certainly be a problem. But I think it is sometimes a mistake to try to balance everything. I'll just say that. So what's inside? Magic, equipment. Do I need other books? And here we go. Here's all the proof in your pudding. Because remember, some of the point of this show is to kind of talk about how the mindset has changed from, you know, D&D is the penultimate, you know, is the ultimate authority to this. In theory, you don't need any other books. It contains everything you need to play the game. However, you will find mentions of some basic concepts that are more fully explained in the DMG, because you weren't really, you know, I don't think you're really allowed to say Dungeon Master's Guide. You can refer to it. You will also find some references back to monsters in the MM. So this is like one of those ways of saying, well, you kind of need the book, you know, the actual books written by the company that made the game, but you also kind of don't. You could just kind of buy this and, you know, you'll be fine. So themes. For those of you familiar with previous Malhovic products, you'll know that I like the idea of themes and building them into a book. So this book, these games and these classes are sort of built around an idea. Oaths and ceremonies. This suggests a world where people take rituals very seriously, and ceremonies constitute an important part of everyday personal life. One imagines the characters in this world have short rituals before they eat or sleep, daily rituals to cleanse the mind. In game terms, big, important ceremonies provide characters with powerful feats and tie into classes and race abilities. Oaths, similarly, carry weight and seriousness as well. The folk of the lands of the Diamond Throne, which is sort of the default setting of this, take things like oaths, honor, and duty very seriously, as you can see from classes such as the Oathsworn and the Champion. Through ceremony, people realize the importance of that which lies beyond themselves. By placing importance on oaths, duty, and honor, they recognize the importance of that which lies within themselves. So you can see that this book is kind of got like an element of maybe of sort of feudalism, you know, whether it's knights or samurai, right? There's sort of this idea of a world of ritual and oaths. Choice versus destiny, right? Some characters swear oaths, some characters choose to become certain powerful things. This is a world where freedom of choice is more important than the unknown whims of the fortune. Contrast and opposition. Characters range from the tiny sprite to the massive giants. For every champion of life, there is a champion of death. There are more contrasting oppositions in a fantasy milieu than just good versus evil. Complex races and classes. Do the giants have a right to rule just because they freed the other races from slavery? Can a Sibeccai ever be free of her self-imposed feelings of indebtedness to the giants? Why does a Moja choose to give up its humanities? What makes Verrik such ciphers? Each race you meet in this book comes with a complex set of inherent questions. Giving power back to the DMs. The core rule, now this is written by the person who helped write the rules. The core rules of the 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook were written to be as simple as possible, with very little need or room for DM adjudication. Arcana Unearthed is intended for game masters or DMs with a little experience who are fully capable of making judgment calls and sensible rulings. This isn't to say that a careful eye didn't watch over the balance and playability of these rules, but that same careful eye also made sure not to overdefine concepts or regulate them too heavy-handedly. DMs have room to make the game their own. So I think by and large, since 3rd edition D&D, and I think this extends to 4th edition D&D and to 5th edition D&D to somewhat, although ironically, I think 5th edition D&D also tried to sort of give power back to the DMs because they didn't think the edition was going to be popular. See, whenever your edition's popular and it sells to a lot of people, that's when you need to make things very basic and you can't give the GMs any, the DM any wiggle room. And 5th edition in some ways was actually designed in such a way that like so much of it was just like, I don't know, YOLO, figure it out. And that's actually a very like old school advanced concept. And a lot of people besmirched 5th edition for that. It's part of the reason why I found it so easy to run. But the problem is when you have millions of new players playing your game for the first time and they don't have any sort of culture or heritage of gaming that they're coming from. They're just picking up this game fresh. And then you get a rule book that basically says, I don't know, figure it out, YOLO. It can be very, very frustrating to new people. And so what was a strength became a weakness in some ways. All right. So some new concepts from this book. Are you playing your D&D? Okay, one thing is racial levels. With the concept of a racial level, a character can focus on advancing within the nature of her race and racial abilities rather than taking levels in a class. So there you go, racial levels. 3.5 edition would eventually take this idea as well later. Talents. Talents are feats that one can only take at first level. Some things you are simply born with. Ceremonial feats grant supernatural abilities bequeathed through the performance of certain rituals. The rituals require expensive components and the help of others. Spell flexibility. Spells in Arcana Unearthed are not just set, unchangeable programs, but flexible, customizable options for players. Each spell can be diminished or heightened to produce a spectrum of effects. It can be laden to hold more power. It can be woven with other spells to cast a more powerful spell. Adding spell templates can change the nature of a spell and its effects. Casters can add in new material components to change the effects. Magic is fluid and subject to the whims of the individual caster, thus it always remains mysterious and fascinating. Hero points. This rules subsets allow players to take special, desperate actions normally not possible under the rules. Hero points allow the game play to more closely resemble fictional stories in which the main characters perform some amazing feat just at the right moment. They also encourage heroic play. Although a bit more complicated than the standard rules, the guidelines in Arcana Unearthed for how long an injured character can stand before he drops allow the system to simulate tough characters who are wounded but still fighting. And, I don't expect everyone to have watched hundreds of hours of Knights of the Last Call, but, we've talked about some of these shortcomings before in D&D, right, where it can be kind of weird to be like, the game is supposed to be heroic and heroes, but doesn't really give you the tools to do that. And we always talk about how, like, there's no way in D&D where you can be, like, dying but still fighting. Like, you're always unconscious before you die. And so there's no idea of, like, this kind of heroic last stand never really makes a difference. So here's how dice work. Here's how we round factions, blah, blah, blah. Basic task. If you don't know that, we're in trouble. D20 plus modifier versus a target number or a DC, right? We know all this. Then we create characters. Note, there is no alignment in Arcana Unearthed. There are no alignments in Arcana Unearthed, and this is 2003, so this was like, whoa, what? No alignment. There are no alignments in Arcana Unearthed to which you must shoehorn your character's outlook. This rulebook does not attempt to define good or evil, nor does it address law or chaos. Characters should decide for themselves what is good and what is evil, the way real people do. There are no spells that reveal whether a character is evil or good. His actions and the perspective of those around him determine that. No, at least very few, characters think of themselves as evil. The truth is, such concepts are relative. Gasp. Now, of course, remember, you might say, well, that makes total sense. Right. But remember, alignment was designed to make it easy to play the game. When you make a game about going in, it's kind of crazy, but when you make a game about, kicking in the door to monsters and killing them and taking and stealing their treasure, that's, if you really think about it, that's brutal. So original D&D kind of, cheated, and it said, well, you're good with a capital G and they're evil with a capital E, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They're evil. Killing them is a good thing. And so, even though you're technically murdering them and raiding them and, pillaging them, you're actually a good guy. And, nowadays you have these modern games and you're like, people are still killing a lot of creatures and they're still kicking in a lot of doors. And I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that a lot of the people playing PF2 or 5th edition D&D aren't just fighting, incarnate demons and undead for the entirety of their game. So you're leaving a wake of murdered bodies, and I'm guessing you looted them as well. And it's always one of those things where I'm like, and yet you people are all like, oh, I don't believe evil is absolute, and all these creatures could potentially be good. I'm like, and you're okay with killing them? That's fucked up. That's kind of fucked up, actually. Like these goblins, I mean, they're people too. What are you doing? Just murdering them because they're in the way? Like, it's kind of, it's kind of crazy. All right. You also note that this is this is before Pathfinder 1 and everything like that. You got a feat every 3 levels, right? And it was not every 2, it was every 3. So you start with a feat at level 1, you get a feat at 3rd, 6, 9, 12, 15, or 18. And that means, and like this game doesn't really have like subclasses or anything like that. Neither did 3rd edition. But that means that over the course of the 20 levels of the game, most characters are really making 7 choices, right? What feat do you take at 1st, 3rd, 6th, 9th, 12th, 15th, and 18th? Most of your class abilities locked in. Most of your, the only real choice you really, I guess, could make is, are you going to multi-class or not? But, that was it. A barbarian was a barbarian was a barbarian in 3rd edition. The only thing that was different between you were your feats, and you only got 7 of them. So, all right. I'm going to skip the ability stuff because we all know what these do. Nothing's different here. These are bonus spell slots for those of you who remember 3rd edition. If you had a very high intelligence or very high wisdom, you would get bonus spell slots to cast more spells per day. The good old carrying capacity when people cared about encumbrance and how much stuff weighed. The old 3rd edition influencing an attitude of somebody. Oh, they're hostile and you want to make them helpful so that they'll actually go out of their way to help them. DC 50. And you might say, well, Derek, that seems insane. Well, then you clearly never saw a decent level half-elf bard in a 3rd edition campaign that really maxed for diplomacy, because they could make that DC. So there's a couple of little things, though, that get called out here, which I think are kind of interesting. One is remembering. Whenever a character might remember something that happened to him either in actual play or from his own pre-game past, or something that happened off stage, you should make a check. In the latter case, it may be remembering something that the PC saw while eating dinner the previous night, and the DM did not want to point it out because doing so would have aroused suspicions. So this is kind of like a way to kind of do a little bit of a flashback, right? It's, something that you technically played through, but you didn't actually play through it, but maybe your character can remember it. And this is a variant use of intelligence check. And it's just an intelligence check, not a skill check. It's just an intelligence check. So, it's one of those things where you're like, do I remember if I saw anybody suspicious at the tavern the other night before the innkeepers turned up dead? And you're like, yeah, go for it. Make a DC 10 or a DC 15 check. So it's one of those interesting kind of little phenomenons there of seeing this sort of small changes to the game. All right, let's get into the races, the interesting races. So humans are exactly humans. They are native. They are natives to now. So one of the first things that's interesting is humans are not the ruling race, if you will. All right, humans are native to the lands of the Diamond Throne, which is the campaign setting. And for centuries, a cruel, draconic race called the Dramoj enslaved the humans, as well as the diminutive Fane. Long ago, the invading giantish army freed them and wiped out the Dramoj. However, then humans served the monarchs of their giantish liberators, who still sit upon the Diamond Throne today. So the humans were slaved to this sort of draconic master race, and this army of invading giants landed, wiped out the Dramoja, and basically installed themselves as the new rulers. And so the humans in this case are kind of living in a feudal system, and they're not at the top. That being said, they're exactly the same as a human in 3rd edition. They have no special abilities, and they get 1 extra feat. And that's it. That's all you get for being a human. All right. All right. Fein. We always call it Fein. Is a catch-all term for 3 different types of diminutive people. In many ways, it's useful to discuss them together, but they do have a great deal of similarities. But there are also some marked differences. So these are basically small, diminutive, fae-like creatures. The 3 types of Fein are the spellcasting lore songs, the nimble quicklings, and the winged sprites. Characters cannot start the campaign as first-level sprites, only as lore songs or quicklings. See the Metamorphosis section for details. So when we played Arcana Unearthed, Tim Carpenter from Knights of Last Call, he played a lore song Fein. They have a love for fun and pleasure, food, games, dance, yada, yada, yada. They are, so here we go. So here's a human over on the left. There's a Fein on the bottom, the 2 Feins, the lore song and the quickling. We can also see the Moja, the Sibeccai, the giant, the sprite, the Latoran, and the Verrik. And believe it or not, in our campaign, when we played, we had a lore song Fein, we had a Sibeccai, we had a giant, we had 2 Latorans, we had 1 Verrik, and eventually we had 1 human. So the only race that no one played was a Moja, and we only had 1 human in the entire campaign. So now you might say, oh, so Derek hated it. No, actually just the opposite. I think these classes and races were all very, very, very cool. Because, and I'll tell you why, because they're tied into the game and they actually have a reasonable meaning to the game. So here are our Fein. They're kind of like Fey-like creatures. They're about 3 feet tall. And they worship thousands of gods. They have their own belief. One thing you'll notice as we get into this game, there is no cleric. So there's no, you can worship these different gods and stuff like that, but it is just a abstract concept. There is no divine character class. There's no divine character classing, in that way. So what do Fein get? Well, lore song Fein get a +2 bonus to intelligence and a -2 penalty to strength, which is pretty common for small creatures in 3rd edition. But because they're small, they get a bonus to armor class and attack rolls, and a bonus to sneak checks, aka hide checks, which again, pretty common for 3rd edition. If a creature is small, it gets +1 to hit, +1 to AC, +4 to hiding. They get an additional +2 racial bonus to sneak checks. Notice they get a +4 size bonus to all sneak checks, but then they also get a +2 racial bonus to sneak checks. So they get a +6. Their base speed is 20 feet. They have innate spell abilities. They can use Detect Magic, Ghost Sound, and Lesser Glow Globe once a day each. They have low light vision, and once they've achieved at least 3rd character level, they may choose to undergo a metamorphosis. This can occur only at a time when you would normally gain a feat, and the metamorphosis occurs in lieu of the feat. They secrete a sticky substance that wraps around themselves. It hardens, forming a chrysalis, and then 1d4 plus 3 days later, you emerge in a completely different form. Even smaller than before, the Fein has now gossamer wings that can carry her aloft. She has become a sprite. And of course, modern D&D, a Fein's gear taken to the magical chrysalis emerges sized for the appropriate character's new appropriate stature. Our Quickling Fein is intelligence, or a racial bonus to dexterity instead of intelligence. And they are also small, but they can run 5 times as fast instead of 4 times as fast. And they can also turn into a sprite. They also get a +1 bonus to initiative checks, but they do not have the innate cantrip abilities of the other Fein. And here's our sprite. Now remember, this game said that you can take levels in your race. So when you become a sprite, when you gain a level, instead of taking a level, say, in fighter or rogue, you can actually take a level in your race so that you can get more powerful racial abilities. So as a sprite, you're sort of this weird magical flying creature. You can invest a level and you get a base attack bonus, bonuses to your saves, just like a normal class, but you gain these additional abilities, such as getting charm abilities, invisibility, dispel magic, greater telekinesis. Your flight becomes perfect eventually at level 3. Now, I'm not saying that everybody was a Fane because they wanted to become a sprite, but a lot of people wanted to become a sprite because cool. The idea of having a base character class that could fly was pretty cool. Sprites get a +2 bonus to dexterity and an additional -2 penalty to strength. These modifications stack. You are no longer humanoid. You become full Fey, and you're not small. You're tiny, giving you a +2 bonus to armor class and attack rolls. Now, keep in mind, if you were a Quickling, you had a +2 bonus to dex. Sprites, you get a +2 bonus to dex. That's +4 bonus to dex. That's 2 more points of AC. You also get 2 bonus to your size from it being tiny. So that character is basically got 4 points of AC just because they're so small and quick. You also get a +8 size bonus to hiding checks because it turns out when you're very small, it's very easy to hide. Your initial base flying speed is a mere 10 feet. Oh, that's on the ground. Sorry. Yeah, you only have a movement of 10 feet, but you can fly at 30 feet. And of course, 3rd edition D&D had this idea of maneuverability class, which was a real pain in the ass if you ever had to play with it. But they could move, but they couldn't hover in place and fly backwards and stuff like that. You needed perfect flight maneuverability to do that. But it was a basic character race that could gain the ability to flight. Keep in mind that when you took a level in Sprite, you would get, skills and hit die just like you were taking a normal level. So already kind of this really interesting idea, right? These small creatures become tiny, that can fly, that have all these innate magical abilities. But you're not going to start with that, right? Your base character had to spend at least a couple of levels as a Fane and then undergo this ritual metamorphosis and then emerge as a sprite and then continue to invest levels into this, thing. So realistically, you might not be able to really do all this stuff until you're like level 6 or 7. But it was still, at the time, a pretty interesting and cool revolution. It took the idea of multi-classing and really elevated it because now the idea was like not only were you multi-classing, you were sort of multi-classing into your race. And that was kind of interesting. We thought that was really fun. All right, next up is the Giants. Giants, of course, don't call themselves giants. They call themselves the Hu Sharad, which means the stewards. But everyone else calls them giants, and for good reasons. They are massive creatures standing up to 12 foot tall. Except for their size, they look normally proportioned to humans, but to them, humans appear as children. In fact, young giants are the size of adult humans. 300 years ago, the giants were told and that they needed to pass across the sea to the west. They came and they basically freed the land, right? They were kind of, the land was under oppression. They arrived and they destroyed them. As is the nature of giants, the discovery of a new land invoked in them a powerful sense of responsibility. The giants, in the mindset of what they call Chi Jalud, conquered the land and its people so they could oversee and rule it. So again, giants have this, there's this whole system that they have of different mental models. And so of how they think of what their role in society is. And it's like a racial identity. So like you see here, in the past, giants have changed their entire racial outlook from Chai Jalud to Si Karan through ritual. So like giants are very ritualistic. And like this idea of like a racial identity of like, we have this responsibility to be justice. And then there's like another idea of like, we are as a species, we are going to focus on knowledge. As a species, we are going to focus on war. Right. However, because it's still an RPG, but you got to make it work. The life of a giant revolves a ritual and ceremony. Even giants' growth to their massive size depends on the ritual called Shurin, attaining the essence. There are 3 stages to Shurin, and at the 3rd, giants achieve their full growth potential. And since not every giant goes through all 3 stages of the rituals, giant heights can vary considerably. So same as the other person. So you can see here, as a race, giants possess 2 distinctive natures. One, when they are under the sway of the ritual known as Chai Jalud, the war dance, which makes them warlike to territorial and deadly. The other emerges when they act under the effects of Si Karan, which is the caretaker. They are calm, cautious, and gentle unless driven to anger. The giants of the Diamond Throne live under the mantle of the Si Karan. I don't know if it's supposed to be pronounced like Shai Halud, but I have to assume that Monte Cook knows what he was doing, and I call it Shai Jalud because it looks like Shai Halud. It's probably Chi Jalud. Chi Jalud, I suppose, would be another way of looking at it. So giants give +2 to strength, -2 to dex. Their giants are not humanoid, but giant. They start at medium as medium creatures. However, they also have 3 levels of giant that they can take. And the hit die of that level is D10, right? Just like a fighter or something would be. And you can see that, their fortitude save goes up, but also they get more strength, wisdom, constitution, and eventually at 3rd level of giant, they become large. So you could, again, have a default character that, starts as a giant, but, they're medium sized, but they're strong. But through these rituals and obtaining these class levels mechanically, the characters are literally investing in themselves, and they emerge from these rituals larger and stronger and more powerful, quite literally becoming a giant. So and again, these are kind of diegetic. Giants can take up to 3 levels in giant at any time. Each level represent the character showing her worth and undertaking one of the Shinrin ceremonies that triggers growth and maturation. And of course, when you become large, you get all the benefits and penalties they were in. And of course, because it's a game, when giants attain this greater size, because the change is magical, their gear also changes to the appropriate size, of course. So you, again, another class or another race with these racial levels that you can level up in. All right. So Litorians are the lion people, and they are honor-bound bestial hunters. I'm a big fan of this kind of like Klingon race idea, and a lot of my games over the last 10 years or so, I've sort of actually carved out that niche for the orc. I still buy into alignment myself, but I've sort of like carved out the world of the orc as to be this sort of like, this kind of almost Viking raiding, Klingon-like culture where they have their own rules of honor and stuff, but their levels of morality, aren't what we would normally consider to be good, but they're not like going out of their way, right, to be quote unquote evil. Like I like leaving that for like gnolls and to a certain extent, maybe like the goblin races, particularly the hobgoblin races, because I think it gives, for me, orcs a kind of an interesting position in the hierarchy of the sort of humanoid monsters. So Litorians are this idea of this, thoughtful, quiet, and provoked, and once angered, they become savage and brutal, almost incapable of showing mercy. So they're this tribal, nomadic culture, kind of, in my mind, they're, maybe a little bit like the Dothraki, right? Like, yeah, I guess the Dothraki aren't good, right? But, are they evil? I mean, sure, they rape and murder and pillage and enslave people, and yeah, that is evil, but like, they're not like doing it just to be dicks, like what we normally think of in terms of evil, right? Their culture is based on raiding and pillaging, kind of like the Ironborn, and so it clearly sets them up to be foes, to be opposed by people who are of good nature. But I think it makes them a little bit more multidimensional than just simply being like we like killing things because we like killing things. We like evil, and of course within that culture, there may be people who very much do that and deserve to be cast down in evil. So Litorians are this kind of nomadic racial a race of lion hunter people, and of course they can level up in their race just like every other level. So they get the scent feat, they get the bite feat, they get a bonus to their ground speed. All right. Moj are creatures that basically they are people, mostly humans, I think, who have attempted to sort of bring back they were originally the lands of this place were ruled by a draconic race called the Dra Moj, and these are people who have basically tried to unlock that ancient magic and have willingly sort of transform themselves in the pursuit of sort of power and trying to untap that ancient power of the Dra Moj. And so they aren't, and it even says here, it is a mistake to call them a race. They are all once humans who chose to transform themselves using a magical process that alters a fully developed human into a draconic Moj. Magical transformation is the only way to create a Moj. The creature process makes the creatures genderless. They gain a tough, scaly hide and a predilection for magic and other intellectual pursuits. As a result of these, they can become extremely long-lived. So they can't really produce. They can only bud off different kobolds that service them. They intentionally gave up being human to transform themselves physically and mentally. Clearly, they are fanatic-driven individuals. However, they do not all wish to see a return to the ways of the evil Dra Moj and do not necessarily want to see the other races enslaved again. What they do is adore magic, craving and hoarding its power. They have a particular affinity for runes, symbols, and pictographs, and et cetera, et cetera. So the idea of this is just like some of these races are trying to ask questions. That's the most important thing that I think Monte Cook was trying to do here, which is if you choose to be a Moj, like your character race comes in with this you already have this pretty intense idea of like your character willingly transform themselves into a weird shriveled draconic creature to gain long life and power. And so the question is like, why? And like, what drove you to do that? Maybe someone's doing it just for power, but maybe someone else is doing it for revenge. It comes like preloaded with these sort of, pre-based questions, which I think is really interesting. So they get a little bit of natural armor. They get some dark vision. And of course, they can take 3 levels in Moj, gaining a breath weapon, gaining bonus to AC, gaining the ability to detect magic, and gaining the sense the unseen feat, and better will saves as you become more dragon-like. All right. All right. Rune children are not so much a race as the result of a magical transformation. Unlike the Moj, rune children can come from any race. One can usually spot rune children by the magical rune on their hand or face. Normally, greatness, in this case, is not thrust upon an unwilling character. Characters who qualify choose to become rune children. And once the choice is made, nothing save death can revoke the power. Rune Child, then, is a template that you can add to any living creature with a minimum intelligence of 11 and at least 5 hit dice. So what is this? You guessed it. It's basically a prestige race. If you're familiar with prestige classes from 3rd edition, it's basically a template that you can take on your character and gain additional abilities by sort of being chosen by destiny or chosen by fate to become this, deliverer. That's the chosen one. Thank you, Leland. That's a great example of it. However, that kind of stuff might be very powerful. And the idea here is that, someone who looks beyond himself and sacrifices some aspect of himself for others, for the world, or for the general cause of altruism might become a rune child. The name has nothing to do with age, but instead refers to being a child of the world, powered by the inherent magic within all things. So basically, it's a position you earn. No character starts as a rune child. One adds the template only in lieu of a level. Effectively, a character chooses to take a level in Rune Child. It also means that qualifying to be a Rune Child is entirely at the discretion of the DM. DMs should determine whether the character truly looks beyond himself and acts for the good of the world more than for his own good. The DM should also determine when the ability to become a Rune Child becomes available, based on the power it grants the character versus what she must give up. The price for becoming a Rune Child is small at low levels, but is much higher at high levels. The level that you gain to become a Rune Child is lost. Thus, an 11th level unfettered, which is a class, who chooses to become a Rune Child as he gains 12th level becomes an 11th level unfettered Rune Child. So you basically miss out on a level. But in exchange, you get your Rune Child powers. You get a +1 inherent bonus to your highest ability score, and a permanent +1 luck bonus to all checks and saves. I gotta love 3rd editions. In addition, as you gain up, you choose one of these abilities as you gain more and more powers, including things like levitating, dimension dooring, energy bolt, healing wounds, elemental resistance, energy sheath, incorporeal form, teleporting, eventually immortality, damage reduction, and the ability to change your shape at will. So you basically become this kind of like chosen one character, but I don't want to say Superman. But again, this is tied to your race. This is your character's race. So obviously very powerful, but cool. I mean, I don't necessarily know that this stuff is balanced. I mean, it does say the DM has to basically approve it. Their superpower is having all the powers. Exactly. Well, no, Leland, powers are cumulative. So if you become a ninth level Rune Child, you pick 1 power from the 5 to 6, 1 power from the 7 and 8, and 1 power from the 9 to 12. And when you gain 13th level, you get a new power. So you get if you were to become a Rune Child at level 15, you would get 1, 2, 3, 4 abilities right off the cuff. All right. The Sibeccai are a jackal people who were basically bred to be a slave race. These are kind of like the moles from Dark Sun, but they were bred by the they were bred by the people who raised them, like, to be a slave race. And then the giants, and they were like a primitive people, and the giants basically kind of took them over and used their magic to uplift them. If you know what uplifting is, basically it's like they kind of like made them more intelligent. They brought them up from their bestial nature. They made them into like a proper, quote unquote, intelligent species. And as a result, the Sibeccai had this weird relationship with the giants because they feel like we literally owe our existence to your species. However, some people, some Sibeccai resent that, and they feel this very strange relationship with these giantish people. So you can see here, Sibeccai feel a genuine respect and admiration for giants, an emotion most giants are too magnanimous to exploit. Like the way in Deep Space Nine, like the Vorta treat the founders. Okay. Again, we're nerds here, so I'm assuming most people know what that means. But like, when I say Vorta, I mean like Wayun, right? So this idea that like they treat them almost as if maybe not as gods, but they are just like, they treat every giant as this sort of like, this greater species, this, who raised them up from being nothing to being something, right? But they kind of dislike everybody else. They dislike Litorians. They feel marginally superior to humans, Verrik, Fane, and most others, and they have an ancient distrust for Sibeccai. Among their own, they put little value in family, focusing on the race as a whole. The identity of one's father or mother does not matter, and relationships are often short and casual. By some standards, they are still new to the world and thus look at their position with optimism. This fresh view of what one can accomplish in life, however, can skew thoughts of what one can get for oneself in life. These can develop sometimes a selfish look. Coupled with their feelings of superiority, Sibeccai can become cruel and vicious. So basically, when I think of Sibeccai, I kind of think of Vorta from Deep Space Nine. And again, it asks this sort of inherent question, like, what if you were part of a relatively new race, right? And on one hand, you feel like you're kind of like the chosen ones by this race, and so you feel kind of superior to everybody, but you're also very deferential and very like respectful to the giants themselves. But everybody else is shit because you were the race that they chose to uplift from savagery and raise into sort of a heightened state. All right. So it's kind of interesting. And of course we can also take things and like the Litorians, they get bite, scent, and increased stats. Admittedly, the Latorian and the Sibeccai's class race levels aren't the most interesting. All right. Verrik they appear human, but they have red skin and white or blue-black hair. They are not human. They neither think nor feel as humans, and in fact, the two races often have difficulty relating to each other. Verriks pride themselves on contextual thinking. They believe they see the world from a large perspective, which leads them to make decisions based on the ramifications others may not see. They value wisdom and intelligence and despise rash or impulsive actions. Verrik invented witchcraft and discovered the Akashic memory. See Akashic and witch classes. Verriks are very aloof, and something about the Verriks make them not difficult to like. Something unnerving, something not quite right. They're super pragmatic, unemotional, and very disciplined. They don't laugh. They don't worship the gods. They're very they're kind of like Vulcan Data. And they get one of the weirdest and coolest abilities of a race ever. They have sensory control. They can selectively shut off their senses. This means that they can willingly blind themselves. They can willingly go deaf. They can willingly shut off their sense of touch, their sense of hearing, their sense of taste, smell. They have complete control over their senses. So there's kind of like an element there of Vulcan Data, Bene Gesserit, But again, they have this kind of they're like a very logical, very disciplined race. And they have some innate sort of psychic abilities. And they always have access, if they're a spellcaster, to complex psionic spells, even though when they normally wouldn't. We'll talk about complex psionic spells. And you can see that they get abilities like they can levitate, they gain telepathy, read mind, compelling command, detect magic, disoriented. So, they gain these sort of innate, sort of quasi-psychic mental abilities if you invest in the races. And then here's our age categories. We can see how old people live. By the way, you can see Moj live for a very long time. They live 340 years plus 3D percentage. So, they're going to live, probably around 500 years old. Long time. Giants live a long time too, between almost to 300 years. Whereas, the human and the Sibeccai are old at 70. And the Sibeccai die even earlier than that. And of course, what would 3rd edition be without random height and weight tables? Yeah, baby. 12 inches plus D3 inches. So you're between 13 and 15 inches as a sprite. All right. KC says, I feel like there would be a lot of annoying end of session begging from the character that wants to be a Rune child. Still cool, but needs a GM who could handle it. Sure, but what I think you would do, KC, is you would lay it out and you would tell the person who wants to become a Rune child, well, if you go and do this, or if you go and accomplish this, and that, then you will have met the criteria to become a Rune child. And until you do those things, the answer is no. And you may decide randomly at the end of one session after the character, maybe they haven't done A, B, and C, but they've done a lot of other cooler stuff. And you just say, hey, I want to let you know, you've been doing great and you've been awesome. You qualify. The Rune appears on your skin. If you want to take the plunge, you can do it, But otherwise, I would just let them know. I mean, I think the reason why people get frustrated is because the GM says no, but then they don't say how. And, giving people a path gives people something to work for. And I think that's a big part of why RPGs are fun, is this idea of knowing how you can work towards something. Nick says, awesome how each race kind of has its own sort of psychological profile and unique worldview. More RPGs should do this. It's a non-visual medium, so a rubber forehead alien is even less interesting than usual. And Nick, I completely agree with you. And in fact, I often talk about how, and again, my group, when I was growing up, in the 90s and in the 2000s, we were playing 3rd edition. My group was not some special super mega group. We were, kind of oftentimes a bunch of murder hobos, and we just people would be dwarf and elf and race, and different races. And, sometimes a dwarf player who, about the most role playing we got from a racial standpoint was dwarves would usually have some sort of really horrible Scottish accent, and they would like axes and beer. But nobody really role played as an elf or a halfling or a gnome. And the answer was no one really even knew what that meant or how to do that. because, you know, they were all kind of just humans with a different paint of skin. And now you have these character races that are just insanely alien, and yet they're portrayed as just being like everybody's exactly the same. Like when you see, you know, all these character races all getting along together like it's Mos Eisley, you're sort of like, oh, okay, so none of these races actually really is different. They're all just, they look different, but they're not different. So, you know, I think what is interesting is that this game, maybe being a bit more advanced, sort of dispersed with that notion. And it said, you're not all the same. You don't all think the same. You don't all view the same. You are different races, and you are different. You know, I think part of the modern stance towards races, species, right, is this idea of like, we're all the same. And while I completely think that is true for, you know, the different human races, which are not actually different races, right? We're just different variants of the same race. But these are very clearly not the same race, right? They are very different species, and they have very different outlooks. And in some cases, it's very alien, and it's very weird. And I think that's an interesting point to do. Exactly. Humans with pointy ears. All right. So absolutely, Dan. Absolutely. Immortality of elves should completely change how they view life. On a fundamental, I mean, it doesn't even really make sense for elves to even be in an adventuring party, honestly, most of the time. And Dan, you know, technically D&D elves aren't immortal, but they are very, very, very long lived. And one of the things that I actually really like about Torchbearer is, I was going to bring up the Torchbearer book, but all I have is this right here is the Game Master screen. What I really like about the idea of Torchbearer is, in Torchbearer, the idea is if you're an adventurer, it's because you're kind of a weirdo or an outcast, right? So if you're a dwarven adventurer, you know, you were basically kicked out of or left, you know, your clan hold because, you know, of something you did or something you wouldn't do. You have nowhere to go. And if you're a human adventurer, the idea is that, you know, you were born penniless or an orphan, or you're the, you know, third son of a third son, and you have no inheritance and you have nothing, and your older brother's getting the farm, and, you know, and when your father died, he kicked you out, and, you know what I mean? Like, the idea is that you have no, you know, and you don't want to just go be like some, you know, servile servant somewhere, so you got to be an adventurer. And the idea of the elf in Torchbearer is that, and, you know, they're very, I mean, they love Tolkien as well, but the idea is that, like, the elves are leaving. The elves are all going west. They're going sailing across the sea. They are supposed to be leaving. And you're the weirdo because you stayed, right? Like, you're not done with, you know, Middle Earth yet. You know, you're not done with the real world yet. Maybe you don't want to make the journey west. Maybe you're afraid to. Maybe you don't want to give up this world that you belong to. So that makes you sort of an outcast in that way from your people, because you've chosen to go, you know, back into the human society and the, you know, mingle with dwarves and halflings rather than answer the call of the sea and journey west. And I think that's always a very interesting way to play up their immortality, which is the idea of, like, yes, they're immortal, but they are supposed to have a shelf life. In fact, they're supposed to have left already. Right, they're supposed to have gone west across the sea to, well, in Tolkien to go to Valinor, but technically Aman. But and I say all this to say that we had a party of, we had a giant. In fact, I can actually, if I can remember them, we had Larry played a giant war mane. Aaron originally played a Latorian totem warrior, but that character died, and then he made a human magister. And then Christine played a Latorian green bond. Dan played a Verrik mageblade. Rich played a Sibeccai champion of death. And Tim played a lore song Feyeen Rune Thane. So we had, like, you know, a bunch of different races and a bunch of different classes. And I can tell you, coming out of, you know, 3 or 4 years of playing 3rd edition with these guys and, you know, and gals, and basically just having zero insight into their character's race, it was really interesting to see how this worked on that group of people, because I can remember, I'll be honest with you, a lot of times when people make characters, I don't remember what race they were because it didn't matter and it didn't really come up. But I remember that these characters felt different. And I remember that Rich playing up, you know, he was a Sibeccai and Larry was a giant, and he played up you know, this sort of subservience, but this sort of dismissal of the other people and the party members. And I thought it was really awesome. Like the way that they actually, just that small little prompt, that small little difference made such a big difference for us at, 2003, So when people complain, when people think I hate weird races, it's actually not. In fact, actually, I kind of think that having these unusual races with these very strong role-playing hooks can be very powerful. What I don't like is when people have all these ancestries and then they're really weird and strange and they should be completely strange and alien. And then they basically say, but they're just like everybody else because people are people and they're all people, and you're going to go into Absalom and you're going to see the living tree person performing as a juggler. And you're going to see the weird spider person from the jungle serving drinks at the inn. And I think when you do that, you are just castrating what makes these class or these races interesting. And it's like, no, these races would not be in that situation, and I just think that's where I have a problem with it. It's not that they're weird and strange. It's that it's just surface level. It's just performative. And I hate that. And I hate the idea that like, oh, they can be anything they want. It's like, no, like, restrictions breed creativity. And when you say that, species doesn't define who you are, you can be anything. And it's like, look, we're not talking about, black people and white people and brown colored people of the human race. And so many people just make this mistake of conflating these species and races one-to-one with our modern day equivalents. And it's not. We have no comprehension of what it would be like to exist with another intelligent species of a completely different alien mindset, from a completely different background, from a completely different way of thinking. It's not just what you look like. And I get it. Like, we grew up, like, again, it's like Tolkien's elves versus people. They don't even think, they don't even look the same way. And so I think that is the biggest mistake that people make. And that's why when people say I hate weird races. No, I just hate the way that people play them. And I hate the way that they're milquetoast. I hate the way that they are just presented as these like dresses that you put on yourself just to look weird and look different. But then you go and join a 3-ring circus. To me, that just neuters. Just completely neuters what the race is, Fooster came in with a big old, you are amazing, super thanks. Thank you for your third super chat on a live stream. Thank you for the $20. That was very generous of you. Thank you so very, very, very much. That was awesome. Thank you. That is awesome. I'm glad you're enjoying the show. And again, before anybody gets any sort of delusions, I'm fairly liberal. Like this isn't like some sort of right wing ideologue here about like, oh, like I think everybody's woke and it's bullshit. No, I think we should care and support. And I think that those racial differences both matter and don't matter, in the sense that I appreciate people having different cultures. Okay. I appreciate people having different cultures, but I do think we're all part of the same human species. And I think there are some cultural differences, but I don't think there's any genetic differences, not on any reasonable level that matter. But these aren't that. These are alien races. This is living with an alien race on your same planet. And I think that the cultures should feel different. And I think the upbringing is different. And I think to a certain extent that biology affects the way that you would perceive and do things. Now, I agree. I don't think like every dwarf should be the same, but I think that saying that, dwarves can be anything kind of robs what it means to be a dwarf. So what dwarf goes is, and especially in a non-visual medium like role-playing games, because sure, let's say a dwarf is exactly like a human. But you're like, but you would never make the difference. You never confuse him because the dwarf is short and stout and very, he's going to live a long time. Well, that sort of stuff never comes up in an RPG. Number one, how old people live to never really comes up in almost 99% of games. So the whole age difference thing doesn't make a difference. And then, it's a non-visual medium. So the fact that he's this short, stout dwarf doesn't really make a difference. He's just played the same as everybody else. And I just think that loses some of the fun and the flavor of having these, weird races. And I think that's part of the fun of role-playing them, is to have these sort of very different experiences and getting to kind of be this weird alien creature, And I like that, you know. I think that's part of the fun of role playing. It's not just the class, but it's the race as well. So, Dan says one thing that people leave out of the conversation is that just because groups of these sentient beings and individuals have varying degrees of capabilities in specific areas, it's not a value judgment. I agree. It is not a value judgment. I'm not saying that is a better way or a worse way to live or to be. I'm just saying it is a way to be. And I think, you know, the problem is, again, I've said it before on this channel. I'll say it again. You know, I'm a very liberal individual, and what I support with my money and my donations and everything like that. But like, I think people are getting conflated when we say that, you know, all dwarves are greedy. They're like, oh, you're talking about the Jews. Like, I think that is a crazy take for anybody to do, right? And you know, because this isn't the same race. It's a completely different race from a completely different culture with a completely different way of being. I mean, in some cases, you know, if you look at Tolkien's dwarves, they were literally carved out of the earth by Aule, the smith, right? The Valar, and then awakened by Eru Iluvatar because he felt bad for Aule because he was going to destroy him because it wasn't part of his plan. So, I mean, this is literally created from the roots of the earth and given, you know, flesh by a creator deity. Trying to conflate that to the religions and cultures and differences between human species is just nonsense. So like, that's where it's, you know, that's where I draw the line. Like it, you know, racism is real and anti-Semitism is real. And, you know, we should definitely stomp both those things out with two big fucking boots. But D&D races being different is not that, you know, that's that. Except for gnomes. Gnomes are the worst. What are we even doing here? I agree. Gnomes aren't even in Torchbearer, and I'm okay with it. I don't. Kender are worse. Yeah, Kender are annoying. I agree. Gnomes are for people who don't know if they want to play an elf, dwarf, or a halfling. I actually tend to completely agree. All right, so let's go. We'll talk about, again, most of this game is pretty much the same, but I do want to kind of talk about some of these different classes, and we'll get into them. All right, so you'll note, technically you can be whatever you want from this game, but you'll note that there was no rogue and there was no thief. Instead, you had this skill class called the Akashic. And this was like a Monte Cook idea. I think this is like a real life concept that it's from Theosophy or whatever. It's like this idea that there's like a universal, it's kind of like a weird, you know, not religion, but it's like a weird spiritual belief that like all knowledge is stored in this like collective psychic construct of the universe. Anyways, the point is, this idea of this class is a class that can tap into this collective memory to gain knowledge, skills, and or information. They are not spellcasters, they are not warriors, but they are very capable with unique gifts. Their powers are mystical, more mental than magical, and coming from training and disciplines. Not magical, but, you know, mystical. So they venture and explore to unlock new nodes of their Akashic memory. Some people require, you know, specialized training. Others appear to be natural. So the way that the Akashic works is, you can see it progresses on a plus 15 BAB. It has goodwill. And as you go up in level, you gain more of these Akashic abilities, and then minor, lesser, greater. And basically, they can reach into the collective memory and gain insight into a needed skill, even one in which you have no ranks and cannot use untrained. But after a full round of concentration, they get a +2 bonus to a single skill check in the next round. They can use this skill memory once per day, per 2 levels, once for 1 through 3, twice at 4, etc., etc. At 9th level, this becomes +4, and at 17th level, that becomes +6. So basically, their core ability is that they can just get bonuses to any skill check that they need at any point in time. And of course, remember, this is 3rd edition, so there was no level-based skill DCs. So like most skill DCs were, you know, 10, 15, 20, you know, maybe 25 or something. So being able to get like a +4, +6 bonus was a big deal. At 6th level or 2nd level, they have honed their memory. They can use any knowledge skill check that they can make using skill memory. They add, whenever they make a knowledge check, they add their intelligence bonus, if any, to the skill bonus again. So basically, you get double your intelligence bonus when you're making a knowledge check, which is equivalent in Pathfinder 2 to a lore check. All right. The Akashic can also double their intelligence bonus if the DM makes an intelligence call to remember something. Intelligent Akashics can use this ability to memorize vast amounts of information, which they can recall at a moment's notice. And again, the idea here is that this recall or memory thing, which we talked about earlier, is kind of like a form of flashbacking where it's like, hey, do I remember anything about this from when I was reading, 5 years ago when I was studying at that library? And you can make the intelligence check, you double your bonus, and the GM will be like, yes, you remember this. And so the idea is that they're like a font of like mystical knowledge. And then they can make a special check equal to their level plus intelligence modifier. This is kind of like a bardic ability, right? The bardic knowledge ability, but you can make level plus your intelligence modifier, see if you know some relevant information about notable people, legendary items, or noteworthy places. This takes 10 minutes. It can be attempted once per day per class level. Little points here. For some reason, Akashics have trouble obtaining information about Rune children. No one knows why. Yeah, that's cool. I don't know. It's a little bit of world building, lore building, which is pretty cool. So, and here's your DCs, right? So, some uncommon area knowledge or obscure knowledge, DC 25, and it's your level plus your intelligence bonus. So you're pretty likely to make that. Anthony says, I want a KOLC Arcana Unearthed live play campaign. Oh, buddy. Oh, that would be a tough one to deliver, Anthony. I don't know. It's been 20 years or over 20 years since we've played this for sure. 3rd edition will always be my first love in some ways. Well, technically like a second or third love, but she was my greatest love. But I also look back at those times and I go, oh, things were different back then. But thank you, Anthony. I appreciate it. And then you get all these different abilities that you can pick up. Just a lot of different special abilities. A lot of them related to knowledge and lore. You can pick up bonus general feats. You can get creature lore sight so that you can like identify creatures. You can get the ability to use a spell once a day. You can call upon a battle memory. So this is like, again, you can kind of build your character to kind of be able to do different things and fill different roles. So you can be very flexible. So like, for example, Minor Battle Memory, calling upon the knowledge of the greatest warriors who ever lived. The Akashic can concentrate for 1 round. Afterwards, for 1 round per class level, they get a +3 competence bonus to attack rolls and damage rolls, as well as a +3 dodge bonus to AC. Remember, dodge bonuses always stack. They can use this once per day. So basically, what this means is for 1 fight a day, you can actually become a pretty competent warrior, gaining a bonus to attack rolls, damage rolls, and armor class by like recalling ancient memories of warriors. Right? It's kind of like a Matt Cawthon kind of feel to it as well. Same thing with like sneak attacks. So using the Akashic memory to remember the vital spots of creatures, they can make devastating attacks. Anytime they would be denied a dexterity bonus when they attack, they deal a D6 points of extra damage. Should they score a critical hit, do not multiply this. Only up to a range of 20 feet. So again, it's very similar to some of these other classes. And then as you get into the mid levels, you can get defensive focus, delving into the memories of other people. Like you can kind of like read their mind and read their past. You can impersonate somebody by using their mannerisms of speech against them. You get even more powerful battle memories, more powerful sneak attack, more powerful skill focuses. And then at the very highest levels of the ability of the game, you get the ability to absorb other people's memories, completely like read a person from top to bottom, ask them any questions. And then the ultimate version of battle memory where you get +5 bonus to attack rolls and damage rolls and a +5 bonus to dodge, bonus to armor class. And you can use this 3 times per day. So pretty sweet. And then spell memory at 20th level, an Akashic can delve into the collective memory once per day to learn how to cast a simple spell of 7th level or lower once. You must have an intelligence of 10 plus a spell level to cast it. They use their class ability and their intelligence, and they can be used once a day. So once a day at 20th level, they can cast any spell of 7th level or lower. All right, champions were kind of like paladins, but instead of choosing a god, they chose a cause. And the causes you could choose were light, darkness, life, death, magic, and freedom. And remember, there's no alignment in this system. Rich, who was a champion of death. And it said, feared and reviled, a champion of death represents the cold end of life and the proper cycle of things. She knows that all things must come to an end and acts to make sure that such is the case. And the way that Rich played it was really interesting. Rich almost played it more like a speaker for the dead, if you know Ender's Game, where, you know, his idea was that like he wanted, you know, death was a natural part of life. And he viewed it as sort of like his role, not only to like destroy undead, but also to like perform rites and you know, like funerals and rituals, like just to make sure that life ended naturally, and that like people were like ready to accept death, you know, and not like I'm a champion of death, everyone needs to die. In fact, that was actually the opposite of it. He was almost kind of like, you know, kind of like the faceless men in a weird way, like where they're just like, well, everyone's going to die, but there's a time and a place for it, and let's make sure it's the right time and the place, which I thought was kind of interesting. Yeah. Like Final Fantasy X. In fact, there was actually a time where he did basically something very similar to Yuna performing the sending, Sam. Almost exactly like that. I'm not sure if Final Fantasy X was probably out by then. So I don't know if Rich ever played it, but the scene I remember very specifically played out a lot like Yuna performing the sending, exactly. And he viewed his role in the same way that God, what was the world of it called? The world of Final Fantasy X called? It wasn't called like Spyros? Was that the world of Final Fantasy X? What was it called? Anyways, but the way that summoners, you know, sent the dead spirits. What was the name of the world of Final Fantasy X? Yeah, someone will know it. So champions got full BAB, good for Spyra. All right, I wasn't like totally off there. All right, sweet, thanks, Sam. Fort and Will, good, and then they get these champion abilities. They can call upon their shield, the power, their weapon. They get Heartening Cry, you know. So they get. I know you hate Final Fantasy X, but the whole cycle of look, there are a lot of things I like about Final Fantasy X, or a lot of things I hate about Final Fantasy X. But there's stuff that's good, and I can admit that it's good. So they get basically some, you know, they kind of feel like paladin abilities, right? Champion abilities, but remember, they're not devoted to a religion; they're devoted to a cause. So they get heavy, medium armor and light armor. All champions choose a cause to defend and uphold. Their adopted cause dictates the abilities granted her in defending that cause. See page 32. So, like in the case of Rich, who was a Sibeccai of death. So here we go. The champion of death serves the forces of the final end, the hereafter, the long night. While most are sinister or cruel in their administration of death, a few look upon death as a natural process. Such benevolent champions of death are not quick to deal death, but instead help those whose time has come naturally. Some champions of death consort with undead as allies and representations of that which they serve, while others despise the undead as abominations, neither living nor dead. And Rich was very clearly in this latter camp. So as a death champion, he got these spelling abilities. He could use any spell completion or spell trigger ice from the necromancy school. So he could use necromancy scrolls or necromancy wands. He had Death's Blessing, giving him a +1 luck bonus to damage rolls against living creatures. He could summon a negative blast of dark energy. He became immune to spells with a negative energy descriptor. He could summon Finger of Destruction once per day, and then eventually cast Wave of Death once per day. We didn't get this high of level, though. I think we only got to like level maybe 8 or something like that. Like most D&D campaigns, we didn't quite make it to 9. But, you know, the other ones that, you know, are, you know, the Champion of Light can cast Lesser Glow Globe. They can cast Blinding Light. They can give them bonuses to attack rolls and saving throws. They can get competence bonuses to search and spot checks. They can call an outsider once a day to serve them as angels and whatever. So you get all these different like cause abilities that are related to you. You also get the ability to call a shield. So you kind of get to summon this sort of, you know, generic, everyone gets the ability to eventually like summon your champion's armor, champion's equipment. So everyone gets a shield and no one can take it against your will, but it can be dispelled because it's magical. It has a +1 enhancement bonus with an additional +1 enhancement bonus for every 5 levels. And it lasts for 1 minute per champion level and can be called once a day. At 11th level, it negates 50% of crits. At 18th level, this crit negation extends to all of your allies within 10 feet. You can call upon the power and you can call upon the power of light by the might of the fortress Erdolan or in the name of the Diamond Throne. And you basically do like a Barbarian's Rage where you get a bonus to strength and constitution, but with no penalty. But you're like, you know, you can like call upon the power of your cause. Eventually you get automatic magical weapon that automatically levels up with you. You eventually also get automatic armor that levels up for you. At 19th level, whenever you take the mantle on the cause of your cause and devotion, the ability score enhancement becomes +8 and your DR becomes 20/+3. You also gain spell resistance equal to 11 plus your champion level at all times because nothing, even magic, cannot stand in your way. You know, most also like at 15th level, you get a reputation. Most champions give a name to your new form, like so you can like kind of become this like avatar form, such as the Lion of Righteousness or the Hound of Darkness. Others then speak of the new form as a different being. He has become the Lion of Righteousness. So you actually like transform into this like mantle of your cause. Again, I thought it was pretty cool stuff in 2003. So life, death, freedom, magic, light, dark. The green bond was a druid, and they could deal with the green. Has an opposition called the dark. The dark is not death, for death is a part of life. Creatures and plants die so that others can live. No, the dark is the force of anti-life that some call negative energy. This force does not provide the world the way the green does. It lingers in the shadow. It lingers in growing places of pain and slaughter, or where the harbingers of the dark roam, the undead. So they're like druids, but they like are like anti-undead. And you can see they get kind of some very. They're also like the best healers in the game. You can see that they get like some druidic abilities like trackless step and speak with spirits and nature's gift, but they also get this infuse with life ability, which is basically an innate ability to heal. Kind of like almost like healing font from Pathfinder 2nd edition. And we're not going to get a chance to go into it entirely. But one thing that is really interesting about this game is all the spellcasting classes have the same kind of spell slots per day and how many spells you could have ready at one time. So the way this works is the characters work a little bit, and I would eventually like really like this system. And this is basically how 5th edition system works, where at first level, you can ready 3 different spells, right? So you could take, I'll just use 3rd edition spells, right? Like you could take Entangle, Cure Light Wounds, and Magic Stone. Well, you only had 1 slot per day. And you probably have 2 because you get a bonus from your high wisdom. It didn't have to be that high to get a bonus. So you probably had 2. And that meant you could cast 2 spells per day from the 3 that you readied. And at the time, this felt really revolutionary because it was like, oh my God, you're like a wizard sorcerer. This is so cool. And of course, now this is just how 5th edition does it. But I really like this system a lot of being able to like, you still have to do some preparation, but you don't have to like, but you get a lot of flexibility. Like if you get to a point where you're like, oh, I need to cast 2 entangles today. Oh, but I didn't take 2 entangles. I took 1 entangle and 1, meld with stone. And you're like, damn it. So I like the ability to kind of ready it and then cast it. So the other thing is the way that this game works is that spells. So I'm going to cut ahead here. We're at 37 because this is our first magic. Spells are divided into 3 different types: simple, complex, and exotic. So if we look back at the green bond, who's like the druid, okay, you'll see green bonds have access to simple spells and all spells with the plant or positive energy descriptors. So what this means is that if we go into magic and we go into spells, here are our first level spells. The simple spells include Animate Weapon, Charm, Compelling Command, Detect Secret Doors, Mind Stab, Predict Weather, Safe Fall, aka Feather Fall, Touch of Fear, Veil of Darkness, Tears of Pain. Guess what? These are the simple first level spells. This basically means all the spellcasters whether they're the Magister, like the Wizard, or the Green Bond, like the Druid, they all get access to all these simple spells. So these spells are shared across all of the different classes. Now, the complex spells are more involved, and you don't necessarily get access to all of the complex spells. For example, our Green Bond only gets access to the complex spells that have the plant or positive energy descriptor. So, and of course, you know, they don't do a great job here of necessarily showing you which ones those are, but they don't, you know, they get Stone Blast or something, but they probably do not get Touch of Pain, right? They probably do not get Creature Lore Sight, or maybe they do, I don't know. So the point is that you have this singular, basically you have a singular spell list. Like if we look at simple spells, right? Ability boost, lesser, get +2 in ability score. Battle healing. This is a simple spell. Every character that is a spellcaster, including the mage, could cast battle healing, right? That wasn't limited to clerics or limited to druids. This was a simple spell. But the more, you know, if we go to 3rd level, slow is a simple spell. So everybody could cast slow. Everybody could cast water breathing. But if you wanted flight or invisibility or sorcerous blast, which is basically fireball, you needed to have that available to you as a complex spell. And that's where not every spellcaster would necessarily have access to it. So I thought it was a really, really interesting way to do spells, because what it meant was you could just have like one list of like generic all-purpose, everybody gets this, and then you could kind of break up the, you know, the complex spells into more kind of, you know, niche things. But yeah, I'm not going to get too much into it, but you know, they were like, so the Mage Blade is a Gish. The power flows to me into this blade. Watch yourself, or the blade will flow into you. Their key weapon, their Athame, is their like spell weapon. They have this spell stroke. So let's take a look at how they do Gishing. So the first thing we notice is they get the +15 BAB. You'll notice that they get up to 7th level spells. They get a bunch of slots per day. You know, ending up with 4-0, 4 first, 4 second, 4 third, 4 fourth, 3 fifth, 2 6th, 1 7th, plus any bonuses that they would get for having a high ability score. We can see that some of their abilities are the ability to do different stuff with their magically formed weapon, their Athame. They can summon it to them. They can use it for defense. They can summon it as a free action. They eventually can slice through spells. They get a couple of bonus feats, and then they get their spell casting. All right. The Athame automatically becomes magical, getting a +1 enhancement bonus every 4 levels. And if you want, you can use that same bonus to make it keen or dancing, which is how the enhancement bonus worked in 3rd edition. The Athame gains a small modicum of sentience in the ceremony. It is a very basic empathic link with the Mage Blade, so the character always knows where it is. It serves as a special focus for all their spells. So as long as the Athame is in your hands, your spells have no somatic components. Basically, you can use your sword to cast spells. At Shimmering, so at 4th level, you can, as long as you have your Athame, you basically get a shield bonus around you because your sword provides you with like a defensive field. You get bonus feats the way that like a fighter would. You just don't get as many of them. You can use them to take things like defensive stance and armor proficiency, combat reflexes, improved initiative, psionic strike, stunning blow, etc., etc. And spells. Here's the key. Mage Blades are proficient with all simple martial weapons. Mage Blades have access to simple spells. So the way that they did Gishes in this game was they still, now you didn't get 9th level spells, but you got all the way up to 7th level spells, 7th level magic. And you actually start with spells right from the beginning of the game. But what they did to balance it is you only get access to the simple spells. But this means that the Mage Blade still gets access to things like lesser battle healing and can heal people because it's a simple spell. They get access to stat buffs. They get access to ice bolts and levitation. But what they don't get access to is things like seeing invisible, or not, sorry, not see invisible. Conjure creatures, eldritch web, flight, summoning eldritch walls, right? So they don't get like the flashy, complex spells. They get the basic spells that enable them to still function. But what this means is that even though they're a Gish, they actually are a good spellcaster, can actually cast spells, but they will never feel as powerful as the casters who are able to cast these more complex spells. But that doesn't mean that the summons, the simple spells are bad or boring. And I think that's an important part. The Magister is the wizard. It's a spellcaster. You get a couple bonus feats that you can use to take meta magic feats and that type of stuff. But other than that, you get really good will, bad attack bonus, and you get a bunch of spell slots per day. And you can ready an unbelievable number of spells per day. And the cool thing about the Magister is they have access to all of the simple and complex spells. So their unique caveat is they can cast any simple spell and any complex spell, which is pretty interesting. So they basically have unparalleled access to the spell list. Additionally, they have to have a staff. So shades of Tolkien here. And in fact, if your staff breaks, you're stunned for 1d4 rounds. And they don't really get a whole lot of things because their whole thing is magic. So it's already 9:00. Boy, we don't really have time for all this. All right, very quickly. The Oathsworn is like a monk, but again, related to oaths. Remember this game talked about how like being, part of your thing was being part of oaths. It goes without saying that like a monk in 3rd edition, they seem a lot cooler. I think in some ways they get super insane speed. Their unarmed attack damage goes up to D20. They get the ability to, refuse wounds and heal themselves, be immune to poison and disease, fatigue and fear. The Oathsworn is a bit like a paladin monk because they kind of have this like, sworn oath that they are set to protect. And as long as they are sort of going after them, that thing, nothing can stop them. That's kind of the idea of them. They eventually can, ignore the need for air, for sleep, for aging, and eventually for mortality in general. So I'm not going to get a ton of options for them, but needless to say, they were like a super monk. All right, so the Rune Thane is what Tim was, and the Rune Thane is another spellcaster, but again, different. So you can see that, like the Magister or the Mageblade, they get up to 7th level spells, and they get not as many, but they get quite a few. But what they get are all these additional rune powers that they can cast. And so the Rune Thane, has abilities to cast spells. And of course, they have access to all simple spells. Okay. But they eventually get the ability to get some access to complex spells if it has to do with like writing or runes. So they're very specific with like the rune type magic. But what the Rune Thane was really cool about is that they could use these runes and they almost were like temporary magical items. Like they could carve a rune into your armor or your weapon, or they could carve a rune onto a door, or they could carve a rune onto a wall, and they could create things like traps, and they could create things like, kind of semi-temporary magic items by sort of, imbuing it with this runic power. You can see here, a touch trigger rune is placed upon an object or a surface, but not a creature. It can cover as small as 1 inch and large as a 10 square. Multiple runes can cover a much larger area. The first creature that touches the surface triggers the rune immediately. And I definitely remember a time where like they were going to be attacked, and like Tim carved all these like rune traps into this, like the entrance to this town that they were defending around the central gate. And like when the monsters came in, the runes all triggered and they like exploded on them, and it was really, really cool. So yeah, it's this kind of like really cool, like, you can create these different like traps and you can create these temporary magical items with your runes. And that's your power that you get through all this stuff. And then separately, you get all the simple spells. So again, you could be casting heals, and you could be casting levitate, and you could be casting all these other stuff. But you do get this whole separate ability of runes, which is really, really sweet. And we had a lot of fun with that. And so like the runes feel very powerful, but they're not like spontaneous, right? Like they take a little bit of time for you to carve it. So it feels like it's a very like preparation based thing, which was really, really fun with the runes. The Totem Warrior was a full-out warrior, gained up to 20th level powers, but they picked an animal, the bear, the hawk, the shark, the snake, the wolf, the wolverine, and they got different abilities that changed kind of the way their class worked. Like if you had the bear totem, then your hit dice was D12 per level. If you had the hawk totem, your hit dice was D8 per level. And you got different proficiencies. They all got an animal companion. So they were kind of like a barbarian fighter ranger, because like they would get animal companions, but they were actually really, really good fighters. It depends on what you want. So like the hawk totem was more of a ranged combat. You got point blank shot, and you got eyes of the hawk, and you could fly. Whereas if you were a bear, you had D12 hit points, bonus to strength. You could have a huge reach. You could turn into a bear. So like you were kind of like this shape shifting warrior that also had an animal companion, and it was kind of cool. So instead of shape shifting being something that was given to the druid, it was kind of given to the warrior class, which I thought was really interesting and really cool. And of course, they have a sidebar here for creating your own, like a lion or an ape. So it was kind of interesting to see spell shape-shifting put into a warrior class instead of a thing. And so that was really neat for us and really cool. The Unfettered is basically a swashbuckler. Before there was ever a swashbuckler. They're a D8 class. They go up to D20 hit dice, but they get sneak attack. But they're not a rogue, right? They're a warrior. And which, to be fair, the rogue getting sneak attack doesn't make any sense. Like the rogue is a thief. Like they're not there to like fight people. So the Unfettered was the idea of like, what if we take like the lightly armored finesse fighter who, hits people in their weak spot and actually make that a fighter instead of making that the rogue, because it doesn't really make sense as the rogue. So they're very lightly armored, but they get to add their intelligence bonus to their AC. They get access to sneak attack. They can parry, and they get some bonus feats that they can use to take some additional powers, feats. You can even see at 13th level, they can parry spells. That's pretty sweet. And then the Warmane is the fighter. But the Warmane is a D12 hit die class. So we all thought this was like so powerful. Like it's so funny thinking back, like how like we're like, oh my God, a fighter with D12 hit points. What will the world do? So the Warmane got and got good fort, medium will. They got bonus feats, weapon specialization, armor specialization. They got the best armor, heavy light armor. They get the sturdy feat to give them even more armor proficiency. They can do a ton of damage with crushing blow. I mean, they were like the fighter's fighter. They didn't really do anything else. Like the totem warrior could like turn into a wolf or summon their hawk companion. And, the Unfettered had like skills and the ability to like flip through things. This class was just like armor, weapons, hit points, damage, until the end of time. All right. This was my favorite class in the game. Is the Witch. So this is the last of our, so again, there's 5 spellcasters in the game. There's the Green Bond, which is kind of like the Druid, and the Magister, and they both get to 9th level magic. And then there's 3 like partial casters. There's the Mage Blade, which is like the Gish. There's the Rune Thane, and then there's the Witch. And the Witch also gets up to 7th level spells. And the Witch is, I think, really, really, really cool. So witchery is the term that the Verrik coined. That's that weird race that is red-skinned and can turn off their senses, to describe the innate magical power that flows within people, perhaps all people. So in some ways, witchery or witch is kind of like their psychic, but the way that it was done, I think, it felt so much cooler. And I've never really liked psionics, but I did love the Witch. Witchery manifests itself in many ways, and it usually takes a great deal of training to learn how to utilize it. Those who do so are called witches. One might say the witch is actually 6 different classes. That is because each witch needs to choose what type of witchery they focus on. There is the Iron Witch. They call upon the strength of iron as well as the keen threat of an iron blade. They often have a gray pallor and glistening hair and eyes. The Mind Witch, one of the most mysterious, types of witch. Mind witches do not even call the spells they know spells. They call them psionic powers. The sea witch, representing the life-giving power of water and the fury of the sea. The wind witch. The winter witch, and the wood witch. So you pick a type of witch you want to be. The winter witch, the wood witch, the wind witch, the sea witch. So basically the elements plus metal plus mind, right? And you can see here that they get a plus 15 BAB, so that's like pretty good. They get a plus goodwill. They get spell slots up to 7th level. And so they get some spell to cast, but they also get different witchery abilities as well as they level up. So again, they're a spellcaster, but they have these separate abilities. Furthermore, a witch may manifest his power in 5 different ways. You can manifest it by the blade, where you manifest a weapon, a physical extension of a metaphysical power. The fire, which motions burn deep within the witch and fuel their witchery with destructive energy. The song, the storm, or the word. So witches had this really cool ability to use different combinations of the type of the power of your witchery plus the way you manifest it to create like basically a different set of abilities. So for example, if you're an iron witch and you manifest the fire of the iron witch, it is the fire lance. But if you manifest the song of the iron witch, it is the armor song. Whereas the song of the wood witch is the life song. And the storm of the iron witch is the hail of metal, whereas the storm of the wood witch is the storm of thorns. So there's kind of this matrix of picking a manifestation by a type of armor. And each of these things does a different ability. Like the armor song weaves a sheath of magical weightless armor around yourself. You suffer no armor check penalty, no spell failure penalty, no movement penalty. And it adds an armor bonus equal to your wisdom modifier plus an additional enhancement of +1 every 5 levels. Singing an armor song is a full round action, but the armor lasts until dispelled. So you basically get this free magical shifting armor around you that is weightless, doesn't impede you, and doesn't impede your spell casting. And so there's all these different really cool witchery abilities that you can pick up. But of course, they also get spells. Although spellcasting is not their primary focus, witchery is. Witches still have access to simple spells. So again, it's this really cool system whereby they can give these characters actually useful spells, but still make them feel limited because they don't get up to 9th level spells. They'll be a level or 2 behind the other primary casters, and they only get the simple spells. Yeah, so again, those are the witches and the witchery. Skills work exactly like 3rd edition. I'm not going to go into that. Feats work exactly like 3rd edition. Talents are just special, powerful feats that you can only take at level 1. And then magic. So one of the things that's cool about magic is, aside from the simple, complex, and exotic, which we talked about here, every spell has a diminished ability and a heightened ability. So let's take a look at a spell that we all know. Okay, here we go. Beast Skin, lesser. It's a level 2 simple spell, so everybody could cast this. It lasts for 10 minutes per level. Their skin becomes tough, either scaly or leathery or somewhat furred, your choice. Lesser Beast Skin grants a creature a +2 natural bonus to armor class. This bonus increases to +3 if you are 5th level and +4 if you are 10th level or higher. So it's a natural armor buff, and it's a level 2 spells. But you can cast this diminished as a level 1 spell, and it just becomes +1 to AC regardless of the caster level. Or you can heighten it to a level 3 spell, and it becomes a duration of 12 hours. All right. What about, let's take a look at another one here. I'm just trying to find one that, here we go. So Cold Blast is a level 1 spell, complex. So not everybody's going to have Cold Blast. You have to have it through, like if you were a Frost Witch and you took one of the Paths of Witchery, it might have given you access to complex cold spells. So this is a ray. It blasts them, and they take 1d4 points of damage plus 1 point of temporary strength damage for every 5 levels. So it does a little bit of damage, and it does strength damage. But you can cast it as a diminished spell, which would be only a 0th level spell, and it just deals only a d4 points of damage. Or you can cast it as a heightened spell and go up to level 2, and then it also stuns them for a round. And, a ranged touch strength dealing stun spell, pretty cool. I mean, they get a fortitude save, but still pretty cool. So basically, in this game, every spell has a diminished version and a heightened version. And of course, we would see this 20 years later or whatever with Pathfinder 2. And it's actually something that I think Pathfinder 2 could have and should have made more use out of. Not just in like the heightened to do more damage, because you can see that a lot of these things scale automatically anyways, just like they did in 3rd edition, where, a fireball does d6 damage per level. It doesn't scale only when you take a higher level spell slot. I'm actually not a fan of that. But what it does instead is it scales the way that like Wind It Back or Longstrider, as it used to be called, where it like kind of almost fundamentally changes the spell, or like how Haste goes from a single target spell at level 3 to a multi-target spell at level 7 in Pathfinder 2nd edition. Slow does the same thing from 3 to 6. But every spell in this system had a diminished and a heightened effect. So basically, when you took a spell, you were really getting kind of 3 spells in one. And the cool thing was, it still limited it to the level that you could access it, because you couldn't take this spell as a level 2 spell. You had to take this spell as a level 3 spell, which means you could not get access to this spell until you were level 5. But once you got it at level 5 as a level 3 spell, you could cast the diminished effect as a level 2 spell. Does that make sense? So like, it's not like a question of where you have to prepare one or the other. When you get that spell, you get all the versions of the spell. Obviously, you can't heighten a spell yet because you don't have that spell slot. But I like this as a way to like let you get access to a spell, but then cast it using your lower level spell slots, which I think is really neat. All right. Let's see how many people dropped off. Oh, well, not that many. We almost had 60, and now we're down to 40. So we played this game when 3rd edition, when 3.5 had already come out. And, but we were kind of like a little salty that 3rd edition came out. We were big Monte Cook fans. And I particularly was a big fan of his wife, Sue Wineline Cook, who they're now divorced, so she's just Sue Wineline. Maybe she got remarried. I don't know. Because Sue had been one of the main editors and one of the main drivers of the Dragonlance 5th Age. And she used to produce the quarterly newsletter, which got sent out for free for Dragonlance, which I loved. So we liked her. And of course, like Bruce Cordell and Sean Reynolds and stuff like that were involved because they're all Monty's buddies. And we ended up, after one of our 3rd edition campaigns kind of came to an end, we ended up picking up this book. A couple of us did. And we ended up making characters. And I got to be honest with you, in the 3rd edition era, I think this was one of the most character-driven sandbox-style games where people really, I don't know, brought their A game. And I don't know if it was because of the change-up, because of the difference, or maybe it was because of some of these strange, at the time I didn't recognize it, but maybe it was the fact that these classes and these races really did feel different. It shook us up a little bit out of our comfort zone, and they kind of came preloaded with these sort of interesting dilemmas and these interesting questions that needed to be answered. But all I know is that it was a very memorable campaign. Again, I think we probably played, 20 some sessions of it, and I think we got to maybe around level 8 or 9 before it, came to an end. But as those things want to do. But it wasn't because we didn't think the game was cool. In fact, there was a lot of things in here. I think Smith has often talked about after his Latoran totem warrior died, he made a human magister. And I remember him feeling and saying for a long time that this was like one of his favorite spellcasters of all time. And part of the reason for that was he had blood is power. I think that's what it was. Yeah, so he had this power, this ceremonial feat called Blood is Power. As a result of a ceremony involving you and at least 6 other spellcasters, you can use your own blood to power your spells. A character with this feat can cut herself as a somatic component added to a spell. After dealing 6 points of damage per spell level, 3 points for 0th level spell, she can cast a spell she knows without losing the spell slot. Characters can use this feat only 3 times per day. Smith just loved the idea of a wizard who could use their life force to cast more spells. And obviously when they were like, it's 6 points of damage per spell level. So to do a 3rd level spell, like a fireball level spell, was 18 points of damage. And when you're only a D4 class, that was a brutal cost. But that's your highest level spell slot. So you suddenly potentially could cast multiples of your highest level spell slots per day. And it was just a fun, tension-filled thing, and it felt like it gave you, what it did is it gave you different levers, it gave you different resources, and it's fun to balance and play against resources is what it really comes down to. Real quick, I did want to actually, now that I think about it, I want to talk about death and dying. Hey, what's up, Vin? What? We're doing more 3E content? Yeah, why not? Sure. I mean, yeah, it's technically 3E content for sure. But this is Monte Cook's version of 3rd edition, basically. So what they did in this game, if you know 3rd edition, there was. To be fair, remember these are baby steps. In 3rd edition, your character was unconscious if they had damage greater than their hit point maximum, technically. And there was a weird state that existed where if your damage equaled your hit points exactly, which basically is to say you're at 0, exactly 0, and only 0, your character was not dying, but you were disabled. And it basically meant you couldn't do anything, but you were not unconscious. And you were not dying, but you couldn't do anything, but you weren't dying. And it only happened at 0. So what they did in this game is as long as you have at least 1 hit point, you can act normally. If you're between 0 and to negative M, and M equals your character's constitution modifier, then you were disabled. And so basically, instead of being disabled only at 0, your character, let's say your constitution was +4, your character could still be up and not just dying at -1, -2, -3, -4. And what they changed is they are not unconscious, but close to it. You can only take a standard or a move equivalent action each round. And if you perform any strenuous activity, you take an additional point of damage after completing the act. Now, but notice you weren't losing hit points each round. So basically there was this place where your character was definitely kind of not functioning at 100%. And every time you took an action, you were taking another point of damage. And of course, obviously, if you took another hit, you would almost certainly be dropped down to dying. But, then you were dying. And instead of dying at -10, you died at negative your constitution score. So if our 18 constitution character, which has a +4 modifier, was fighting at 0 to -4, they would be disabled. They'd still be able to act, but they would only get one. They'd either get a standard or a move, not both. And any action they took would also deal a point of damage. Then between past -4 to -18, they're dying. And then if they go beyond -18, they die. So it gave you a little bit more hit points. It gave you a little bit more of that kind of like, I'm up, but I'm dying kind of, now obviously modern games like MCDM, Draw Steel is obviously taking this to like the nth level, the most heroic version of this. But at the time, it felt like a cool difference and a cool change for us. And lastly, hero points. This game included hero points. Sometimes a character commits a selfless act or brave deed that one can only call heroic. In such a case, the DM should award the character a hero point. Not for starting the session, not once an hour. It's only when they commit a selfless act or a brave deed. In such a case, the DM should award the character a hero point. A witch that jumps down into a pit full of vipers to heal a dying friend, even though he'll take damage from the fall and risk deaths from the snake venom, is a real hero. Hero points are a reward for that kind of valiant action. Hero points can be used at the player's discretion to perform amazing, otherwise impossible actions. Unlike most of the other rules in this chapter, hero points require a considerable amount of DM adjudication and discretion. DMs with no interest in rewarding heroic acts or allowing PCs to perform acts beyond the rules should ignore this section. Blah, blah, blah. You should award them. You should award them at the end or beginning of a session when XP is discoursed. The most important thing to remember about hero points is that awarding them is totally up to the DM. Some characters may never earn a single hero point, while others, over the course of a campaign, may earn many. Some whole campaigns may never use hero points, while on others, they may be common. Characters with the born hero talent should, if they acted all appropriately, earn at least 1 hero point per level. Still, the exact rewards are up to the DM. A character should never earn a hero point performing an action in which they use a hero point. On his turn, before determining the success or failure of an action, a player can announce that he is using a hero point to help accomplish that action. Normally, the hero point adds a bonus of plus 20 to the action if the D20 roll dictates success or failure. Number 1, there are exceptions. If it's used with an attack roll and the attack roll would have succeeded without the hero point doubles the damage, so basically a crit. Or it allows you to make a special called shot, such as striking their eyes and blinding them for a number of rounds, striking their head or vitals that stuns them, or striking the limb and rendering it useless. 2, if a character uses a hero point to act when it is not his turn, they can take an entire normal round's worth of actions out of the normal initiative sequence with no bonuses, and then they return to the normal initiative count. 3, if used when a character is being attacked by a physical attack or a spell or a threat, they can be used to add plus 1d20 luck bonus to armor class or a saving throw. And if used with a saving throw where you would take half damage or a partial effect, if you had made the save without the help of the hero point at all, you take no damage at all. And lastly, if used when a die roll would determine that a character would die, you avoid the death and instead suffer a great and debilitating injury as determined by the DM, gaining a disfiguring scar, losing a hand or an eye, etc. 5, a character can use a hero point to make something work in a way that the rules do not normally allow. This requires careful DM adjudication. For example, a magister could use a hero point to cast a special version of vitrification that turned a foe to glass for only 1 hour instead of permanently, or that could be undone only by special requirement, such as the touch of 3 honest moj or exposure to the light of heaven. An unfettered, remember that's like the swashbuckler class, an unfettered might use a hero point to not only disarm a foe, but to send the weapon sailing over into the hands of a nearby ally. The DM should still apply all normal circumstance modifiers to the PC actions. Actions using hero points can still fail. The object of hero points, more than anything else, is to represent the role of wild luck and karma in overcoming logical circumstantial penalties to extremely difficult actions. They make the nearly impossible somewhat more possible, but still not a sure thing. Hero points to NPCs. The GM might want to give them to NPCs. They may even wish to invert the concept and award villain points to characters who perform extraordinarily villainous deeds. DM should consider awarding bonus 50% experience points. So that's how hero points worked in this game. I don't know if we use them. I don't recall anyone using hero points, actually. So at that time, in 2003, I think I was like, no, these are stupid. And who wants these dumb narrative mechanics in the game? I think that was my mindset. Metacurrency suck. So that was Unearthed Arcana, and it can be yours for $8. And again, remember, they did make a bigger version of this, a sort of remastered version of this called Arcana Evolved. But you know, it's one of those things that showcases that, you know, there was some cool stuff that you could do with the 3rd edition engine. You know, obviously this came out in 2003. If we go look to 2006, 2007, you know, you start to see, like I said, the aforementioned books I mentioned, Dungeon Craft, Book of 9 Swords, Dragon Magic, Player's Handbook 2, Magic of Incarnum, What's that other one I never remember? But there were some cool ideas there, you know. And we haven't talked about it yet, but another thing that Malhovic Press did, we'll talk about it someday. Let's see where it is. Here it is. So this is another Monte Cook Presents book. This is called Iron Heroes. This is another variant player's handbook, but this one's by Mike Merles. But they're both produced by Malhovic Press. But this is Monte Cook Presents Iron Heroes, a variant player's handbook by Mike Merles. This is another extremely interesting 3rd edition variant that I would love to cover someday, in which basically everybody's a martial character. There's like no spell casting. There's one spell casting class, and it's like very limited and kind of like death, like dangerous. But you get these really, really awesome, cool resource pools in order to power your abilities, and it's really shaped how I think potentially D20 based. You know, if you want a more crunchy 4th edition style game, I think it's a really interesting way of approaching game design, and I think DC 20 does a little bit of this. Daggerheart, MCDM. I mean, it's something that I've seen more and more commonly in the sort of new generation of D20 based gaming. But I just think it's a really interesting note. What is Draw Steel's mechanic? I have not been following it all. Okay, I could be corrected here because my version of Draw Steel that I know is very old. But basically, when you get down to like 0 hit points, you can basically choose to either, be knocked unconscious, or you can choose to like keep fighting on or something. And if you keep fighting on, your character doesn't get knocked unconscious. But then you get like half your hit points back, but you like lose them. And then if that hit points run out, you like are guaranteed dead or something like that. I could be completely wrong about that, but basically like, you're going to die at the end of the fight when you make that decision to like stand, but you get like a big chunk of hit points that you get to burn through to keep fighting. But you get to make that decision like when you get taken out. So it's kind of like Fabula Ultima, right? With a sacrifice or surrender, except in Fabula Ultima, sorry about that. In Fabula Ultima, when you choose sacrifice, your character is guaranteed dead and they like go out and you don't really use dice. You just sort of say, this is the awesome thing that my character does, right? Like in Fabula Ultima, like let's say the party's trying to escape and then, the necromancer, does something that like, locks the party in the tower, and then like, your character's like, I'll disrupt the ritual and, get you guys out. And it's like, no. And you're like, no, this is what I'm going to do. And if the player chooses a sacrifice, they basically they're considered to be automatically successful. Their character will die and be removed from play, but there's no like dice rolling and there's no chancing. In Draw Steel, it seems like, you just get to keep playing. It's not like some automatic plot based thing where it's like, oh, you die, but you succeed before you go out. Something like that. Yeah, I think that'll be it. We did like 5 hours on Tuesday, so I'm not really looking to do a ton of time here, but if anybody has any questions or thoughts or anything that you want to do, questions about 3rd edition, Monte Cook, Arcana Unearthed, or just anything, if you just want to shoot the shit a little bit, let me know. Otherwise, we will probably be, famously, as I'm known to say, we'll probably wrap up here in a few minutes. But again, I thought all day it was Wednesday all day. So I didn't really think about I didn't do a poll with my patrons, and I didn't really think of fun. And I know that we had just been talking about this thing, and I thought it was kind of funny because we just talked about like, oh, it's a brand new way to play 5th edition. And I was like, here's a brand new way to play 3rd edition D&D, and I thought it was kind of funny. So that's one of the reasons why I picked it tonight. And it's just been something I wanted to look back through the game, and I wanted to kind of share it. And there were some really cool books and really cool design that came out during that era, and I'm glad I got to play them. And I got to play them with my friends, and it was a fun time. And I feel badly, honestly, for people who just like have been playing the same 5e game for 10 years. Not because they're playing 5e, but just because there's just so many cool games out there. Even if it's just like a variant of 5e or a lot of people like, holier than thou elitist know-it-alls will be like, oh, they went from 5e to Pathfinder 2. It's basically the same game. And it's like, no, it's different. It's different, and I do think there's a world outside of the D20, but I think even getting a chance to play a couple different variations of D20. You know, if you play D&D 5e, Pathfinder 2, maybe D&D 4th edition, if you play DC 20, if you play, you know, all these different games, I think it gives you a sense of perspective, because these game designers are trying to fix ultimately, you know, problems that they see at their game table. And I think that's a worthwhile effort. Absolutely. Yeah. Palom and Porum from Final Fantasy IV, right? In fact, also Jackal Torn Moons. Like, that's not something like, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, wait a second. And I, you know, you could confirm this. Like, because they're like, because they try to heal them, right, of their petrification, and they're like, it won't work. They did it to themselves. But like, if you're in the normal battle mode and you cast petrification on yourself and you get turned into stone, you could totally use like an Asuna, or you totally use like a gold needle to like restore them from stone, right? So it's purely a narrative thing, right? You know, it's like the old thing in Final Fantasies. You can only die in a cutscene, right? When you're getting killed, when you get killed or knocked out, you know, in a battle, that you're not really killed, even though they're casting, you know, Life 2 or Revive or Phoenix Down on you. You only get killed in a cutscene. It's the only time you can die. Yeah. So, new year. Bob and I are going to meet up tomorrow after work. There's a new gaming tavern just down the street from me. Bob went there with his brother while his brother was home over the holidays. He said it was pretty cool. Empty, but cool. Bob and I are going to go over there and grab a drink. I haven't been over there yet, so I'm interested to check it out. But Bob and I we're going to talk about what we want to do with Knights of Last Call 2025. So, you know, if you're a member of the Patreon, you know, I'd love to know. You know, maybe we'll do another survey. We've done those in the past where we ask people like, hey, what are you enjoying? What would you like to see more of? You know, we can't make everybody happy. Obviously, we do a variety of different variety of different games and a variety of different options here. But you know, I'd love to. You know, unfortunately, no, we probably won't be gaming Jackal Torn. You know, Bob's got to get home to the kids and stuff. But you know, we'll grab a beer or two. So at least there'll be that. And you know, I'm just trying to figure out like, you know, what's best for us as a group. You know, obviously 2024 was tough. 2025, you know, I can't count on, you know, people being available for me to play with. So that somewhat limits my options, but we also don't have a studio, so it kind of makes me feel less bad about it. But you know, again, I just I'd like to see what we could do. And yeah, we want to talk about Northern Reaches season 3. Again, remember, show was over. We talked about it, whatever. This is more of just me like waxing, pontificating. You know, I still haven't cracked the code on our mega games yet. Because, you know, and every mega game and I'm not ashamed to admit that like I'm wrong, you know, like with Northern Reaches, you know, the main problem that we suffer with any of these mega community games is we start with a large population and over time it dwindles, and that might be very natural, but we've tried to sort of fix that problem because, you know, we're not so large. It's not like we have 500 people in this game, and by the end of it, you know, oh, well, by the end of it, you know, you were down to 125 people. It's like, okay, that's still a crazy amount of people. But when you start with like 60 or 70 players, and by the end of the season, you're down to like 15 or 20, you know, it could be harder to get a game, and, you know, that you're playing with the same people, and it loses that sense of meganess that I think is really interesting. Now, I've thought about the idea of like, maybe we should just do shorter campaigns, like shorter seasons, like really short. But people seem very opposed to that, even though so many people check out after the first, you know, 4 to 8 weeks when they don't find the game as engaging, or they get busy and they don't want to come back. And, you know, and Karama, that's also another interesting good point. It could be that the end of the season being Thanksgiving and Christmas is a huge issue. Maybe we should try to launch the season earlier and end the season like, you know, near Halloween. You know, and maybe, you know, November, December are off months, and then, you know, we come back in January or Feb, you know. So that's a good point. But, you know, one of the main things that originally we thought was like, well, look, we want this to feel like an MMO. You know, we had a big enough Discord with enough people who liked Pathfinder 2 that we felt fairly common. And by the way, Northern Reaches season 1, I mean, nothing has grown our Patreon, and a lot of those people have left. So I'm not saying like they came in and they became permanent members, but nothing nothing that we've ever done on our channel has made us grow as much as Northern Reaches as a singular thing, like as one thing. So we had just a ton of people join just to play Northern Reaches. And, Northern Reaches Season 1, we wanted to feel like an MMO. We're like, look, we want people to put in the work, earn the sweat equity, really feel prideful about what they did. And so, it was an XP-based system. And if you weren't high enough level, get fucked. But that created problems near the end of the season because now suddenly as a GM, if you make an adventure, who do you make it for? Do you make it for the 5 or 10 people that are level, 18, 19, 20? What about all the people that are level 15 or 14? And as you play a game like Pathfinder 2, which really cares about level to the point where if you're just a few levels lower than other characters, you might not even literally be able to function. You might not be able to hit anything. Everything will auto crit you. So it became a real problem. So in Season 2, we tried to fix that, where Aaron introduced sidekicking and mentoring, which, he took from EverQuest 2 and games like that. And obviously those games do that automatically. So there's an advantage there. But we found that was still kind of flawed because, magical items didn't magically appear in your character's inventory. There were still issues of feats, and it was a lengthy and cumbersome process. It was kind of a pain in the butt, and a lot of people just didn't enjoy it as much. Right? If you were level 5, you would rather go on a level 5 adventure, not be temporarily boosted up to level 12 and then kind of suck and go on a level 12 adventure. At the same time, in Season 1, we had low-level characters who would go on high-level adventures and basically be told, sit in the corner, you'll just earn a ton of experience points. This is part of the grind for you to catch back up, which is fine, except that's a terrible experience. Like, I don't want somebody to be sitting there just, not playing and having to take, total defense every round just to not immediately auto-die and just sit there. Like, that's a terrible experience. So, Northern Reaches Season 3 was supposed to launch this year. As we got into the spring, and then as spring started to get long in the tooth, I had a conversation with Smith, and he said, yeah, I'm just so busy with, my kids are starting a new school. The company I built for over 20 years got sold. He just said, I'm not gonna be able to do it. And I said, okay. So we worked together and we came up with kind of a fill-in season, which is Southern Beaches, which was kind of a joke. And because it was something quick and easy that we could get out and not put like a ton of rule sets into. And I was kind of curious. I was like, well, this is a good experiment. Let me see if I can. I'm thinking the reason why people lose interest in these D20 games is because they don't play for a couple of weeks and they aren't the same level as everybody else. And as a GM, it becomes difficult. As a player, it becomes difficult. So I said, okay, in Southern Beaches, everyone's going to level up once a week. And everyone, even if you take a few weeks off, when you come back, you'll all be the same level. And we're going to use automatic bonus progression. So we know that you need the right rune, and we know that you need the right striking rune, and we know that you need the right potency rune and the right whatever fundamental runes to function. You get those automatically. And so we implemented that. And then, I thought I'm very smart, that'll solve the issue. And it didn't. So, I'm very, unlike Bob, I love Bob, but, unlike Bob, I'm one of those people who says like, look, I'm not going to do something or release something unless I feel like I can actually make a iterative improvement on what I perceive to be existing problems in the game or play design space. The fact that it just like, well, it kind of works is not good enough for me to feel comfortable putting my stamp on something. So, now part of it could just be maybe it's just endemic to human nature. Maybe these things are just, there's no way to avoid people leaving the game. I don't know. But all I do know is that I've been trying to, solve this issue for 3 years and still haven't quite figured out the solution to it. So, one of the things I want to do now that Southern Beaches has ended is take a look at, what can we do that'll make the game more engagement friendly for people. But I also don't want to make it so that it destroys player agency, right? Like this gets back to the ivory tower design that I was talking about with Monte Cook. I like the idea that somebody who put in the sweat equity, who played the games, who showed up, who actually did the stuff, maybe it's just my old school mindset, but I think that person should still get some kind of bonus or some sort of improvement. And I don't know if that makes it so that the people who aren't playing feel, less likely to want to play, or they feel relegated, or they feel, marginalized or whatever. So, that's always a problem that we had. I remember in Season 1, we did our final raid battle versus Triune, and we basically said, we're going to take that, there's got to be a cap. And I said, we're going to take, everyone who's level 20, and then we'll take, 5 other people, the next 5 highest level people. And that meant that there were some people who didn't get to play in the raid. And they might have been very high level. We had some people who were like 17th level or something, but they didn't make the cutoff. And they were kind of salty about it. They were like, well, look, I can't play 2 times a week or 3 times a week like some of these people can. And like it doesn't feel fair that I'm being, cut off from playing, And it's kind of like, well, we can't play with everyone, like that we're limited by the space, we're limited by the time. But at the same time, if I just basically go, hey, everybody can play and nothing matters and there's no advancement and, you can play whatever you want. Everyone will always be the same level. Everyone will always have the same exact abilities. Everyone will always have the same exact whatever. I don't know how well that would work. I feel like that would lose people's interest because they would feel like, what are we even doing here? But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people just want to play. I don't know. But I do think there's a power progression that, people like to show off their cool stuff, their unique stuff. And I could be wrong. Maybe I am wrong because this has happened in every single, NR that we've done. Jackal says, being the guy to deep dive new TTRPGs and actually understand why the designers are making the choices they do is a good corner to be on. Look, Jackal, look, I couldn't make a living off of this channel, but I don't need to. So, because I have a job. So, honestly, between me and you and the 40 people, 50 people that are here, I honestly wonder what these full-time content creators are even doing with their week. I'm not even joking. If you're a member of my Patreon, by the way, check us out, patreon.com/nights.call. You'll know that I'm on that bitch a lot. Like, sure, during the day, my day, I'm very sporadic because I'm working, but typically, right around 4 p.m., unless I'm streaming, I'm usually on that thing from like 4 p.m. to midnight, and sometimes much later. So I'm spending, 4 or 5 hours a day on my Discord talking about games, not just glad handing people and making, superlatives, I get it. I horribly do not have a life. I completely agree with that. Right. Again, I'm single. I don't have kids, but I have hobbies. I go play racquetball. I play Magic the Gathering. I take my dogs for walks. I do things. I cook. I still try to do some stuff. I go to Vegas a couple times a year. I like what I like. I like what I like. I go to my conventions. I think I do better than a lot of people do, quite frankly, in terms of just trying to, do stuff. Because I don't watch TV and I don't watch movies. So think about that. Think about it all the time. I'm not judging it. I'm not knocking it. In fact, I actually wish I watched more TV and movies. There's a couple TV shows that have just I've seen clips of them and I'm like, I feel like I would really like this show. The show about the guy from, it's the guy who played the guy who played Lieutenant Dick Winters in Band of Brothers, but he plays like a really, really super rich guy. I'm not sure the name of the show. He's like a really super wealthy hedge fund manager or whatever, and it's like about this hedge fund. Like I've seen clips from that show, and I go, "Oh, this looks like a really, really interesting show." Billions, thank you. Okay, but I'm like, I obviously have not watched it, and probably will never watch it. So that show looked interesting. The show about the lawyers with the kid who's like, I don't know if he's like got a photographic memory or something like that. That show looked interesting. And again, you're like, Derek, that show was like 10 years old. And it's like, yeah, I know it. Yeah. Ted Lasso looked really interesting. But I don't watch TV. So imagine all the time that you spend watching TV or movies and just eliminate that. What would you do with your time? Well, I figure out things to do. Anyways, my point is, I don't know what these people do with their time, because on a given week, if I stream on Sunday, I'm sitting in front of a camera live 9-10 hours, sometimes more, plus probably another 20 to 30 hours on my Discord, interacting with people, running things, trying to, manage things, coming up with ideas, and not, again, real gaming stuff. Not to mention any other the gaming, related stuff that I'm doing for the channel. And I'm like, and I'm not in full time. This isn't what I'm doing for my job. So I'm like, if you're one of these content creators and you're full time and you produce one 15 or one 12-minute, 10-minute video a week, maybe at most. I'm like, are you just, and like, you're like, oh, this is such a hard racket. I'm like, are you working like 5 hours a week? Like, what are you doing with the rest of your time? Are you like complaining because you make one 12-minute video a week, you spend the other 35 hours of your work week doing nothing, and then you're like, oh, I barely get by. I don't know. That sounds like a pretty freaking good racket to me. Like, it's crazy. I don't understand what these people are doing with their time. I don't. So unless it like legitimately takes them 20 hours or 25 hours to just think of something to talk about for 12 minutes. In that case, I don't understand that either, because again, we produce, 50 hours or something, 50 hours of content a month. I don't know what it is. It's a lot. Anyways, I don't remember how we got, I don't know how we got in this topic, but Band of Brothers is so goddamn good. There are very few TV shows that I have watched multiple times. And obviously it's not a TV show, it's a mini series, but I am not ashamed to say that I have seen Band of Brothers many times. I've read the books. I've read a couple of, I'm not like a World War II historian, but like I've read a lot of the books by those men and about those men and about the 101st, and I incredible story. Just amazing. Kendall says, I'm not ashamed to admit I'd watch 5 ways to improve your 5e games 5% every week. Kendall, are you saying that if somebody made that show or something, or is someone making that content and you watch it or something like that? Now, Jackal, you are not wrong. I've often said that. I don't have time to write a short letter, so I wrote a long one instead. I'm agreeing with you in that respect. However, there's still a time discrepancy to be accounted for here. Oh, you said that's what you'd make in a recent stream or something like that. Yeah, oh, right. If I were to go full time, right. Yeah, well, Kendall, it's more like if I needed to make a living, off of this. Like you can't, there's a very few number of people who could make a living, doing the not D&D thing, right? This is already a niche within a niche within a niche, I also know a lot about like home repair and finances. I really should talk about that, about, savings, retirement planning and tax sheltering and money management and stock portfolio management. I should talk more about that. You get a lot more views that way. But that's not what I'm passionate about, right? So I only do this because this is what I'm passionate about. But if I had to make money out of it, things could be a little bit different. There's a world where if I didn't have a regular job, where like I bet between this channel and if I started doing a lot more, if I brought, if I had to I'd have to rebuild a shop because my wood shop got destroyed in the fire. But if I was doing like 1 or 2 furniture pieces a month plus this channel, I don't have any, I don't have any debt and anything like that because I hate credit cards. In fact, it's probably to my detriment that I don't have any credit cards. But I could probably skate by just like barely. But again, that's because I have no children, nobody's support, just 2 dogs. So it's a lot easier for me. And also, sure, like I like role-playing games, but like my hobbies are pretty cheap, on the basis. Like even when, like, sure, it's like, oh, he goes to Vegas 3 times a year. Yeah, but like I promise you, most people probably spend more money, I don't know, in a year at the bar than I do just going to Vegas. Plus, when I go to Vegas, I go with my buddy. My buddy's a platinum member. We get our hotels for free. Like we've set up a situation where we kind of like have gamed the system so that we can make it cheap for us. I fly, Spirit or Frontier. You know what I mean? Like I don't check a bag because that costs extra money. I have a special backpack that's like the perfect maximum size to fit into the carry-on. So we do it economically, right? So we can make it by. And yeah, they're probably paying people to edit, I guess. But it's like, yeah, so it's like, I don't know. Cause I see some of the views. I'm like, well, you should be getting something. anyways, so yeah, that's, because one thing that I'm dealing with right now, which I need to talk to Bob about tomorrow, is we wanted to do a non-Pathfinder 2 mega game. And we've talked about other systems for a long time, but Dragon Bane was a very popular system last year, and it still is fairly popular. And I think it has a lot of advantages about it. It's very low complexity for people who don't want like the super complex game of Pathfinder 2. And it's like, I want to do a mega game for that. And we have Northern Reaches Season 3 to think about. But in both those cases, I'm hesitant because I don't have a good solution yet for how to prevent 50 to 60 to 70% of the people from dropping out of the game over the course of, 4 to 6 months. And especially with Dragontide, Dragonbane isn't going to be as popular as Pathfinder 2. So with Pathfinder 2, you might start with 60 or 70 or 80 people, and then you get down to like 20, and you're still able to get games and play games. But like Dragonbane might only get like 40 people, which would be awesome if we could keep 40 people. But if 40 people becomes 10, that's not a mega campaign. That's just 2 groups, And so that's where I'm concerned about that. And like I said, I literally was like, man, what if we did seasons that were just like 8 weeks long, like just 2 months with, would you rather play a game that had 50 people engaged every week for the entire length of it, 8 weeks, or would you rather play a game that lasted, 40 weeks, but by the end of the year, 75% of the starting people had attrited away. I and especially in D20 with the nature of people want to progress and they want to level up and they want to do this and they want to do that. Like I get the desire to make it longer, but I just I've seen it have flaws in the system. GM Philosopher makes multiple videos a week and his content suffers because of it. Dan, do you wish to expand on that concept or on that statement? I'm curious what you mean by his content suffers for it. Is that are you making a dig at me? I'm bringing up the Philosopher. He's got 5K subs, so I mean that's less than me. He's streaming. These are 30-minute streams. That's interesting. I wonder how well that does. Well, they're not getting very many views. I mean, this seems like a pretty small content creator, right? Yeah, I mean, this is I've not heard of this guy, the GM Philosopher. But again, I mean, I'm not saying like I'm some mega subscriber, but I mean, I'm including myself in this. Like anybody below 20K subs is basically just doing this for fun. Yes, the old 22 by 18 by 10. Yeah, you got it. A multi-system mega game? I don't think so. I mean, there's a part of that that's actually really interesting because one of the things, Jackal, that we learned, and this is what, has spurred me to be that one of the reasons why Dragontide has been so delayed is because as we were dealing with it, I realized that another issue with the mega game is that we have a lot of people who would absolutely love to participate in the mega game. And a lot of times when we play Northern Reaches, there are people who obviously love playing Pathfinder 2, but what they really love is the community. It's the chatting, it's the planning, it's the, sometimes in character, sometimes out of character. It's the, arguing, the debating. And there's a lot of people who want to participate in that, but they just do not have the time to play in even one 4 or 5 hour additional game per week online. They might have their one home game and that's all they can play in. They might already be stretched thin because they're playing 2 games a week and, their husband will kill them if they play a third. So I kind of had this idea of wanting to build up or build out the non-game part of the game and actually make that fun. And I was really surprised. I mean, it's kind of anecdotal, but we're not that big. But I was surprised by how many people I got that were interested, who basically said, I would love to be part of the mega game experience, but I don't think I could play in more than, 2 or 3 games a season. Realistically, I'll never be free. So my idea was, okay, well, how do we make basically a Discord based game that wasn't just play by post, that let the people who weren't playing in 4-hour sessions of actual game interact with in a meaningful way the people who are just like able to log on from their computer from work, and they can't, so I think that's what, and trying to solve that issue has been really, really tough for me because I'm not a game designer and I'm bad at this. So there's that. Thank you, Ton. Ton said, I didn't make enough money for unearthing this classic. Did I play it in its heyday? No. Would I play it now? No. But it's a cool artifact from that era. And Tundalis, thank you so much for that. But I completely agree with you. I mean, this is an artifact from its era. I'm not chomping at the bit to go play a first edition AD&D campaign. I love that system, and I grew up with that system and when worshiping it and reading the Gary Gygax's DMG. I have no desire to go play that game. Would I bust out realistically an Arcana Unearthed campaign? No. There's, I think, better games, more interesting games. It's the same reason why, there was a time where I thought Settlers of Catan was the most mind-blowing, Settlers of Catan, Carcassonne were the most mind-blowing games of all time because we'd grown up playing, whatever, Monopoly and stuff. And then circa late 90s, we get introduced to Settlers of Catan, and it was just I can never imagine playing a game that would be better than this. And now I don't play Settlers of Catan, not because it's a bad game, but just because, we take steps, we make improvements, things. I'm a believer that, I'm not a very conservative person. I don't necessarily always think that things were better in the past, right? I think progress is good, and I think gaming progress is good too. So my hat's off to folks like you, Ton, who are actually trying to innovate and evolve and take the lessons from the past and apply them in a meaningful way for the future and, paving the way forward. I think it's a very noble thing that you're doing. So I agree with you completely that, would I play it now? Also no, but it is a cool artifact from its era. So thank you, Ton. Do I have any carry-on backpack recommendations? Yeah, just get a cheap one that isn't going to completely fall apart. Like if you spend a ton of money on luggage, I think that's dumb. Obviously it needs to, number one, it's carry-on. So it's going to be with you. So it doesn't have to be that expensive because let me see here. Because, you're not worried about it getting messed up or tore up by, handlers or anything like that. But I mean, if you go into Amazon and if you find any of the, if you look for if you type in Frontier or Spirit, you'll see these 18 by 10. You can even go to Frontier, Spirit, or the airline that you're planning on flying and see what their carry-on restrictions are. A lot of times too, a good carry-on bag will have cinching straps so that you can, once you put your clothes in and stuff, it'll cinch up. And the main difference is basically that the bag will open all the way around so that, you're not just loading stuff from the top like a normal backpack. I mean, I agree. Buying a good backpack is a good investment. I mean, I have a North Face backpack that I've had for 10 or 15 years. And I have a JanSport that I got in college. So I've had that thing for over 20 years. And they're both kicking it just fine. So I just don't spend that much money is all I'm saying. But there's quality and then there's too much quality. But I'm saying, for a travel bag, just get what you need. I mean, I think mine was 30 or $40, something in the 35 liter department, 35, 40 liters is usually going to be good enough for me. That would be my recommendation. And again, if you go to Amazon and you type in Frontier approved carry-on or something, something like that, you'll get some bags that should work. I mean, check the dimensions and check the other stuff. But do you think it's a bad idea to play D&D 3.0 for a D&D club at my school? I'm a teacher. Would I be shooting myself in the foot not playing 5e? Yeah, I think you would, Kendall. I mean, 3e is really cool. But 5e is a lot easier. Advantage is so much simpler than all the different bonus types. Proficiency is way simpler than, ranks and cross-class ranks. And And, you know, if those kids get interested in RPGs and they want to go play other things, you know, they're going to be very disappointed if they learned 3rd edition because they're not going to be able to find a game, you know? So my response to that is probably 5e, like just out of like, you know, for saving grace for them. That being said, Kendall, I mean, I think if I was starting a fantasy adventure gaming club at, you know, like for, you know, younger kids who are just getting into the hobby, like I think I'd probably play Dragonbane these days because I think Dragonbane's even simpler to run, and it's very, very it ends up provoking and instilling a lot of emotions. I think Dragonbane, and also the Dragonbane box set is an incredible deal. It has everything that you need to play for numerous sessions. Comes with great pre-gens, a full campaign, not an adventure, not a partial adventure, full campaign, the full rules of the game, not a partial rule set, not an abbreviated rule set, the full rule set of the game. It comes with stand-up markers, maps. Like, it's an incredible deal. So it's like basically like a RPG club in a box. Oh, you do have the box set for Dragonbane. All right, well, then I'm preaching to the choir here. I mean, granted, you'll still have the same problem, which is they'll be like, oh, this is awesome. And then they'll go, you know, try to play, you know, they'll try to go play D&D or they'll probably try to go play RPGs online and discover there's nobody playing Dragonbane. Everybody's playing 5th edition. But, you know, at least then they can be like all superior and go, oh, you guys are playing 5th edition? Yeah, I play Dragonbane. It's European. Well, that's another option. You can always get $400 worth of books for free if you do Castles and Crusades. Granted, if you play Castles and Crusades, then you're having that same experience that you would have if you played 3rd edition, right? Castles and Crusades is more sort of old school, toned and centric, and it may not necessarily, carry over as well to other games. But you also can't argue with a company or a game that wants to support you and do that type of stuff. Didn't they just get a new edition? I remember Castles and Crusades, the original edition. I remember Smith got that. He was like, we got that like Gen Con 2K4 or something. Maybe 2K4, 2K5. It was pretty early on, but I remember he was just like, he was being very like snobby about it. He was just like, oh, guys, I can't believe we're playing these just modern games. They're just so like they've lost so much sight of the plot. Like he like became this like like this like grognard reforged. it was really fun. Okay, well yeah, again, I don't know anything about the new reforged. So there you go. If it's 5e adjacent enough, I mean, there you go. I only say that because I don't know that I've seen a Castle and Crusades book in the flesh in like 10 years. So that's the only reason I question how popular and how widespread it is. That's the only reason I question that. But I mean, it also depends on what you want out of your RPG game. I mean, I've said before, I think the best RPG game for people who are brand new to RPGs is Fate Accelerated Edition, just because I think it cuts to the core of what I think a role-playing game is. But I digress. All right. Well, 10 o'clock. We had some fun. We kind of went off the deep end. We talked about a bunch of different stuff, and we had some fun. So hopefully everyone's going to get some fun gaming in this weekend, this evening. Looking forward to... excuse me. Looking forward to talking with Bob about the future of this channel and some of the stuff that we're going to be doing, and hopefully come up with some really cool new stuff. We got a couple of streams in the hopper. We've gotten some support. We're going to do a Draw Steel stream. We're going to look at where that game is in development, because my understanding is they're not actually going to publish it, I think, till 2026. I think I heard. But there's been a lot of development since we played it, and we're also going to be looking at Pathfinder 2. The spells. We're going to remaster the spells, and we're not going to go through every single spell, but for the spells that got significant changes, we're going to take a look at them, and especially the ones that I really complained about, and see if they made them better. Along with new spells that have come out. So that we got a lot of support for our PF2, which was really appreciated. We appreciate that. And then I don't know what we're going to do with the Torchbearer stuff, but I don't know if we're going to show it on the channel or just for the patrons. So we'll have to remain to be seen. So how's the map building going for Torchbearer? Well, actually, Thaddeus, I'm been meaning to outsource that to some patrons. I had a poll up and I wanted to kind of like I'll see what I can do this weekend, but I wanted to get the patrons to sort of adopt a different region and then let them play as sort of like a faction in that region. And then every town turn that the parties take will be like, they'll get to make a turn and they'll get to like build up some of the detail of that level just to kind of like, well, number one, to make it more of a community game, which I think would be fun, but also would be kind of fun because it kind of lets other people play a little bit of the game. So I think that'll be kind of interesting. So in terms of the map building, I'm kind of wanting to outsource it to the patrons and see what they do with it. That being said, I have played a little bit more around with Incarnate. I think I'm pretty happy with the style that I want. I pretty much, I think, have the first dungeon built. I want to add a couple more things here and there, but I think I'm trying to remain fluid. If I'm being honest, Thaddeus, my main, because I hate VTTs. So Torchbearer's official sponsor of the only official thing they have is on Roll20, and the only thing it is a character sheet. It's a character sheet on Roll20. That's it. There's nothing else that tracks it. Foundry, someone built an unofficial Torchbearer module that actually had character sheets, tracked light, and tracked the turns and stuff like that. But it was really way out of date. So I found a developer, a French guy, and I threw them a couple €100, and they fixed some of the bugs and updated the Foundry version from version 8, which wouldn't even run on a modern Foundry at all, to version 12, which is the current version. And we've been sort of debugging that, and he's been sending me releases, and I have to, I go through and find bugs or whatever. And so we're pretty much good there. So now it looks like Foundry could work well. The problem I'm having next is that Torchbearer uses cards. And even in the box set, they come with cards. Now, these aren't really, they're not cards in the sense of like a deck of cards, a hand of cards, a discard pile, but it is nice to have a nice little card support. And the Roll20 card deck is actually quite good. And it was actually very simple for me to implement these in Roll20. That being said, it kind of sucks in Foundry. So, and then the other problem, I'm going off on a tangent here, but in Roll20, the Torchbearer sheet is just a sheet. It's basically a form fillable PDF in Roll20. I mean, they didn't really do much to it, right? So every piece of item is, you have to hand type it in, and there you could type in BP for backpack, you could type in BPAC for backpack, backpack. Whereas in the Foundry module, because it's, using Foundry, there's the items tab, and you can make an item object, and you can make a backpack object, and a player can take the backpack object and drag it onto their character sheet, and it'll go into their torso slot. So there's a little bit more, of that management and automation that is, sometimes kind of nice to make the game a little bit smoother. Like, I don't want it to be hyper automated, but I also because again, that's how you would do it. I mean, because you might say, well, Derek, isn't that how you would play it in person? You'd have to write everything on your character sheet. Well, no, because if I was playing Torchbearer in real life, I would be also using the, equipment cards that come with the game, and I would be using these for people's areas in front of them, because I think that's kind of fun. Did you miss anything, GM Scott? What's going on, buddy? No, you did not miss anything. Sebastian is correct. I'm pretty sure Draw Steel is coming out in June. It looks great, but I watched a 2-hour stream where they finished 2/3 of a combat. No thanks. Well, so that's like the 4th edition dilemma. I will never say that 4th edition combats were fast. I think our average combat length was around 90 minutes. We had some that were 60, we had some that were 45, but we had some that were 2 hours. But here's the thing. If you're having fun, and as a group, you like combat, you like cinematic fights, you like the tactical challenge of the fight, and everybody's engaged, and it's not, the problem is that most D20 based combats are boring, or they might be exciting for the first round or two, and then it's just a slog. Or you get bored because you have to wait 25 minutes for the GM to look up a bunch of spells, or a wizard player character who doesn't know any of the things that their abilities do, or someone who doesn't know anything on their character sheet and has to go looking through a book because no one knows a rule, and you're like, I just want to die. That's the problem. If everybody's like, wow, this is like, me and my friend, we used to play Warhammer, and Warhammer's just, we'd play for 3 or 4 hours, and that's just one big combat. And, you know, it's they go, I go, they go, I go. It's literally turn taking. And sometimes I'd be sitting there for like 20 minutes waiting for my phone's turn. But I was bored because that was fun. That's what I was here to do. So for people who like that kind of dramatic, combative, tactical action, you know, you're almost like, yeah, I'm glad the combat took 2 hours because that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of interest, you know, so that's how I feel about that. Got to pick up Shadow Dark at my FLGS this week and also figure out a Greenwell Quick Start. I saw you signed up for that, Jackal. It'd be interesting. I'd love to see what you say with that. Thank you so much for that. Well, thank you so much, Agile Monk. I appreciate your support. Saw you over there in RFC land the other day. Always fun to see names I know. But thank you for supporting me and thank you for the kind words. That means even more because again, I appreciate the money and it helps us pay for some of our bills and our dues. But that's all right. You know what? The fact that you even knew it was misspelled puts you in the top 10% of people who know me. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much. I'm definitely going to watch this VOD since I finally grabbed my Arcana Evolved to fill in my Monte Cook stuff. Arcana Unearthed, Iron Heroes. Yeah, we actually talked a little bit about Iron Heroes too, Jim Scott. I definitely want to do a Iron Heroes stream at some point in the future. Because this book was awesome. But yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's old school, you know, in the sense of 3rd edition being old school, but it is a very cool, interesting take. I think a mega game that is connected to the games that you and Bob run, actual player know, would be interesting. That might be tough to do though, because I mean, I agree, Jackal. I think that'd be a great way to. I mean, that's a very aspirational thing, and I do agree with you that would be really cool. But it is tougher to do. It is tougher. But it would be a good way to, you know, get everybody on the same page.
And tipped $5.
Hey, Kendall. Well, thank you so much for the support. Appreciate it so much. Thank you, everybody, for these little tips here right at the end of the game. I think it's really interesting to just see how many people just stick with us through these. You know, again, I cannot stress this enough. When you see a D&D YouTuber and they get, 10,000, 20,000 views on a video, that's a pretty big video for most of us I mean, you get your drama videos that occasionally will blow up and get 50K or 70K, but most of the bigger people are going to get 10 to 20K, and that's a really good video. You're doing pretty good with that. You're pretty happy with that. That's tough to do, but a $5 tip, okay, is worth 2,000, ish, depending on what you want to do, how they want to do math, 2,000 views. So like, is it easier for me to go find 2,000 more people to watch my video, or can I just really connect with a handful of you and have a couple of you make that generous tip, make that generous super chat, make that generous donation, and I don't need views because just a couple $5 and $10 tips is. I make more money on a video than people who, who do that. So anyways, awesome stuff. Cool stuff. I appreciate it so much. Thank you, Kendall. And yeah, Thaddeus, if anything, a lot of people say, wow, Derek, like, I really love your take on RPGs. I really love your view of things. In fact, like Max from Grimwild sent us a really nice email after the stream on Tuesday, and he said, like, it was awesome watching it. It was like, I was shocked and amazed at like how quickly you were able to pick up not just what the purpose of this mechanic was, but also like that you understood what problem I was trying to solve and why this solved it. And it's like, I appreciated the call out. It was very nice of him, and he also left a very generous tip to us. That was awesome. Certainly it was not, we didn't even know he was going to show up, but the people, when people want to know, it's because I read all these games and I played all these old games, and that builds up this sort of foundational knowledge that allows you to sort of to know where the RPG industry is going. You kind of have to know where it's been. So I think that's really interesting. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. I hope you all have a great weekend. Thank you again to all the incredible people who showed up today and hung out with us for this kind of last minute trip. Thank you for the Hides His Eyes, Anthony, Self-Confessed Cynic, Tundalus, Agile Clark, Agile Monk, and Kendall Carlson for the and Satir for the tips and super chats. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you for the stream, and I look forward to seeing you all next time on Knights of Last Call. Good night, everybody. Peace.